The next item of business is a statement by Nicola Sturgeon on Glasgow Prestwick-Airport. The Deputy First Minister and Cabinet Secretary will take questions at the end of her statement, and there should therefore be no interruptions or interventions. I call on Nicola Sturgeon. Deputy First Minister, you've got 10 minutes.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. I'm very grateful for the opportunity to make a statement about the future of Glasgow Prestwick International Airport. As members will be aware, Prestwick Airport was bought in 2001 by its current owners, the New Zealand-based company Infratil Limited. It's operated through Infratil's subsidiary company, Prestwick Aviation Holdings Limited. It's fair to say that the airport has faced many challenges in the last few years. Passenger numbers and freight tonnages have reduced markedly, and the airport has been loss-making. The airport, along with Manston Airport in Kent, which is also owned by Infratil, has been up for sale since March 2012. A number of private investors have shown interest in buying Prestwick Airport. The Scottish Government, in partnership with Scottish Enterprise, South Ayrshire Council and the other Ayrshire councils, has been working with potential investors and with Infratil to help facilitate a private sector sale. This has involved discussing the support that could be offered within state aid rules to assist a new owner in the early years of ownership. Our approach has necessarily been conducted in commercial confidence, but it has been constructive and, I believe, valued by both Infratil and prospective buyers. However, Presiding Officer, despite that considerable effort, I must report to Parliament that we have reached a stage where it is clear that no private investor is able to commit to a successful purchase of Prestwick Airport in a timescale that is acceptable to Infratil. In those circumstances, the Infratil board has been considering its options, one of which is to seek to enter into commercial discussions with a view to public sector ownership, and the other option being to close the airport. Now, clearly, the closure of Prestwick Airport would be a serious and unwelcome development for both the Ayrshire and the Scottish economies. We have therefore, in parallel with our work to help facilitate a private sector sale, been working with Scottish Enterprise, South Ayrshire Council and the other Ayrshire councils on contingency plans. We've been examining carefully the implications and the consequences of both options, public ownership and closure, and I want now to deal with each of them in turn. Public ownership of airports is a familiar concept. The Scottish Government already has ownership responsibility for 11 airports, and others are owned and operated by local authorities in Argyll and Bute, Orkney and Shetland. Now, these are mainly small airports which provide vital links to our remote communities. However, in England and Wales, some major airports are owned wholly or substantially by the public sector. These include Manchester, Stansted, Newcastle and Cardiff, the last of which was very recently bought by the Welsh Assembly Government. However, as members will appreciate, the investment of public funds in commercial environments is subject to EU state aid regulations designed to prevent the distortion of competition. The effect of the regulations is to require any public investment to yield an appropriate return over time comparable to that which might be expected by a private investor. This market economy investment principle has to be the guiding light in considering public ownership options. To examine the practicalities of public ownership on this basis, we asked independent financial and aviation consultants to assess the prospects of the airport with the appropriate financial investment and commercial management being returned to profitability within a reasonable timescale. The work of the consultants indicates that this is demanding but possible. It would require additional business to be secured in both passenger and freight-related activities, a wide-ranging efficiency programme and the disposal of surplus assets. Presiding Officer, the other option is closure of the airport by Infratil. Now, as members will appreciate, the impact of closure would be a devastating blow to the people who work at Prestwick Airport, to their families and indeed to Ayrshire as a whole. Unemployment in Ayrshire is already above the Scottish average, and the loss of Prestwick Airport would exacerbate this situation. Around 300 people depend directly on the airport for employment, and in total there are around 1,400 people whose jobs depend on or are associated with the airport. This includes approximately 460 people who work at maintenance, repair and overhaul facilities which are dependent on the airfield being operational. Also, taking account of the important aerospace cluster at Prestwick, there are a total of 3,200 jobs directly or indirectly associated with the airport. Now, while the aerospace jobs are not directly dependent on the airport, it's no coincidence that many of these businesses have located so close to an operational airport. And it is undoubtedly the case, in my view, that this important part of the Ayrshire economy would be less secure in the future without the continued operation of Prestwick Airport. So, in short, the airport is of significant strategic importance to the Ayrshire economy and to the wider regional and national economy in Scotland. The total gross value added associated with the airport in 2012 was £47.6 million in an Ayrshire context and £61.6 million in a Scottish context. The airport also has a very important resilience role in terms of diversions for bad weather or aircraft emergencies, as was demonstrated by the recent Egypt Air incident. So, Presiding Officer, in light of all of this and having carefully considered the options, I want to inform Parliament today of the Government's intentions. We believe Prestwick Airport can have a positive future. It will require investment and it will take time. However, we believe it can be returned to profitability. We also estimate that the cost of closure to the public purse would be very significant, and this is an important factor in our decision. We are therefore determined that the airport's economic contribution, including the direct and indirect employment opportunities offered by the airport and its related businesses, should be maintained and then enhanced. We want to secure the future of Prestwick Airport and the businesses that depend on it. We want to reassure staff that we will work with them to make the airport a success. I can therefore advise Parliament that the Scottish Government has advised the current owners of the airport of our intention to commence a process towards acquisition of Prestwick Airport. Following the agreement of its board earlier today in Shanghai, we are entering into negotiations with Infratil for the potential acquisition of Prestwick Aviation Holdings Limited and its subsidiaries. Conclusion of this process will of course be subject to the Scottish Government carrying out confirmatory due diligence. The terms of sale will be on a commercial basis and in accordance with the market economy investment principle. It is our intention to seek to complete due diligence and detailed negotiations on the terms of sale within a 6-week period and to do so on a commercial basis. A copy of our recent exchanges with Infratil will be placed in Spice for members' perusal. I can also advise Parliament that Infratil has agreed that it will continue to ensure that its subsidiaries keep the airport fully open and operational while this process is ongoing. And this is a point I want to emphasise, not just to Parliament, but also to the airport staff, to passengers who have already booked to fly, and to those considering Prestwick Airport for their next holiday or business trip. Prestwick Airport is and will continue to be fully open for business. Key, Presiding Officer, to public sector investment will be the development of a strong and credible business plan which will kick-start work to turn around the business and lay down the foundations for its restructuring and repositioning. Such a plan will also set out a timescale for the return of the airport to profitability. Once the final decision to proceed has been taken and the transaction has been completed, I will make a further statement to Parliament. I should emphasise that it is our intention that Prestwick Airport will continue to operate on a fully commercial basis, and I expect that we will seek to engage a commercial partner to work with existing staff, both to operate the airport and to develop its assets in a way that maximises the long-term return on public sector investment. We will also look to involve and work closely with the 3 Ayrshire councils whose participation and support is necessary to make a success of this venture. Presiding Officer, Prestwick Airport is important to the Ayrshire and to the Scottish economy. We are ambitious for it and indeed for the Scottish aviation industry as a whole. Prestwick Airport can have a positive future as part of that wider industry and without any negative impact on Scotland's other airports. With perseverance, patience and some innovative thinking, it is our belief and intention that the airport can and will be brought back into profit. Over the next few weeks, we will be focusing on due diligence, on legal and commercial issues to provide a firm foundation for Scottish Government ownership, on detailed negotiations with Infratil and on the development of the business plan. Our strong desire is to reach a successful conclusion that will allow Prestwick Airport to thrive again, that will help us to protect and sustain employment and that will build and strengthen the engineering and aerospace cluster that surrounds the airport. Presiding Officer, these will be our priorities and I hope very much that they will be supported by colleagues across the chamber.
The Deputy First Minister and Cabinet Secretary will now take questions on the issues raised in her statement. I intend to allow around 20 minutes for questions, after which we move on to the next business. It would be helpful if members who wish to ask a question were to press the request to speak button now. And I call James Kelly. Mr Kelly.
Thank you, Presiding Officer, and I thank the Cabinet Secretary for advance sight of her statement. There's no doubt that this is a serious situation for Prestwick-Airport. It comes as a result of reducing passenger numbers, which have translated consistently into profit and loss accounts where expenditure exceeds income. There is no doubt that, as the Cabinet Secretary has outlined, that the consequences of closure of Prestwick-Airport would have drastic implications for both the local Ayrshire economy and the wider Scottish economy. And from that point of view, I welcome the steps that the Scottish Government has taken today to seek to take Prestwick Airport into public ownership with a view to building a sustainable model in the future. I have three questions. In terms of due diligence, can I ask if the Cabinet Secretary can provide further information on the due diligence process, specifically what oversight Parliament will have of that? There will clearly be implications for the Scottish budget. Can I ask the Cabinet Secretary how the Government will be able to draw down from a fixed Scottish budget, given the additional financial commitments that there will be as a result of this initiative? And can also ask the Cabinet Secretary what confidence the Scottish Government has in finding a future buyer, bearing in mind that this has proved difficult up until now.
Deputy First Minister.
Can I thank James Kelly for his questions? Can I thank him for the welcome that he's given to the Scottish Government's action today to safeguard Prestwick Airport and safeguard the jobs that depend upon it. He's asked me three specific questions. Firstly, on due diligence, James Kelly will appreciate that the due diligence process for any acquisition of this nature is a complex process, but given the circumstances, we have an intention and have given an undertaking that we will carry out such due diligence as quickly as possible. And I mentioned the 6-week timescale in my remarks. I will commit to coming back to Parliament at the conclusion of that process to report on the outcome of that, to give more details at that stage on the Government's proposals for the ownership model of Prestwick and for the business plan that underpins our proposals to turn the airport around and bring it back into profit. And I will keep members, particularly those who have a constituency or regional interest in the airport, as updated as it is possible to do, given the commercial nature of this transaction in the intervening period. In terms of budget, I would say two things there. Firstly, John Swinney, the Finance Secretary, will make such provision as is required within the Scottish Government budget to underpin the commitment we are making to Prestwick Airport. James Kelly will appreciate that we will require to put in place, and I indicated this in my statement, a robust and a credible business plan. And the extent of Scottish Government investment in the airport during the period of public sector ownership will flow from the business plan that we put in place. Clearly, we have been working to date on estimates that are very much initial estimates that are based on the initial work we've done and the initial work, the initial information that has been given to us by Infratil. Our due diligence process will help us to develop the detail of that, and that will be part of the further updates to Parliament that I give in due course. In terms of James Kelly's third question about a potential future private sector buyer, of course it is our hope and intention to see Prestwick return as a thriving airport to private sector ownership at some point in the future. I'm not able, nor would I choose to put a timescale on that at this stage. Clearly turning Prestwick Airport around, bringing it back into profit will take time. It will take perseverance, it will take patience, it will take investment. And from the point of view of the Scottish Government, we want to dedicate ourselves, working with our partners in Scottish enterprise and the local authorities involved, to do that work in order that at some point in the future we do have the ability to restore the airport to private sector ownership. And Parliament will be kept updated on all of these points as is appropriate. I hope Parliament will appreciate that much of what we've been doing around Prestwick over the past few months has had to be commercially confidential. But I thought, given the stage that we have arrived at now, it was the appropriate moment to update Parliament, and I can undertake to the Presiding Officer and to Parliament that I will keep colleagues as updated as possible in the time to come.
John Scott, followed by Adam Ingram.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. And can I begin by thanking the Deputy First Minister for the advance copy of her statement and the courteous way she has handled this change of ownership of Prestwick-Airport. And of course I welcome the fact that this statement ends the uncertainty there has been since Infratil put Prestwick-Airport on the market, and this statement lifts what I believe was an immediate threat of closure, as well as noting the ongoing strategic importance of the airport. I welcome too Infratil's continuing commitment to keeping the airport open until due diligence can be carried out, and note and emphasise that Prestwick is and will remain open for business. And finally note the need to support the airport to remain open to protect and enhance the 3,000 to 4,000 MRO jobs around the airport. And I too have three questions. And firstly, while I understand the difficulties in making such a prediction, when would the Deputy First Minister hope to return the airport fully into the private sector? Secondly, while I note the Scottish Government's intention to buy the airport from Infratil, what further level of investment do they see themselves being able to provide to bring it up to full international standard to support the private sector partner they will be seeking? And thirdly, without breaking commercial confidentiality, what alternative uses and developments of the airport does the Deputy First Minister envisage, and would she welcome proposals from entrepreneurs even if they lack funding for bringing them forward? And finally, can the Deputy First Minister provide reassurance to us that the albeit temporary business model of public ownership that is proposed will be compliant with European, UK and competition law?
Deputy First Minister.
Can I thank John Scott for his questions and recognise the constituency interest he has in Prestwick Airport. I will run through the questions as quickly as I can. In terms of the timescale for a return to private ownership, I don't think I can say much more to John Scott than I said to James Kelly. It is, of course, our long-term ambition to see Prestwick Airport returned to private sector ownership, but there is a lot of work to be done between now and then in order to ensure that that is a viable proposition. And we are undoubtedly talking a matter of years rather than shorter than that. But that information will become more detailed the more the business plan for the airport develops. Again, in terms of investment, the airport will require investment by the Scottish Government in order to put it into the position where at some point in the future it is able to be returned to the private sector. I want to caveat the information I'm given to Parliament on this today on the basis that we require to do our due diligence and we require to put in place the business plan. The estimates we are dealing with are based on initial work and information provided by Infratil, but Infratil estimate its annual losses at the moment, including capital expenditure, and I think that's an important addition, to be in the region of £7 million. So clearly an airport that requires a lot of work to turn it around, and it's important that we do the correct preparation and the correct work to put ourselves in the best position of doing that. In relation to the next question by John Scott, we welcome all entrepreneurs or business interests who want to do business with Prestwick, whether they are in the passenger area or the freight area, or businesses that perhaps have business interests in doing business associated with the airport. And once the Scottish Government is in ownership, when we get to that point, we'd be very keen to have discussions of that nature. And lastly, I mentioned state aid specifically in my statement. Clearly, everything we do here requires to be compliant, not just with UK law, but with European state aid regulations. That's why I spoke about the market investor principle. That is the guiding light for everything we do here and will be the guiding light as we take forward this particular venture.
Adam Ingram.
Thank you very much, Presiding Officer. I also have a constituency interest in Prestwick Airport, and on behalf of my constituents, I very much welcome the Deputy First Minister's action, which secures the short-term future of the airport. Can I ask her how confident can we be for the longer term and for investment prospects? And can the Deputy First Minister give early consideration, perhaps in the development of the business plan, to a rebranding of the airport to Robert Burns International, and to remove the less than appealing pure, dead, brilliant logos?
Cabinet Secretary.
Can I thank Adam Ingram for his questions and also recognise his close constituency interest in the airport and the interest he's shown with John Scott in this issue over a period of time. Adam Ingram asked a question about long-term prospects. Clearly, the whole point of the government acting in the way we are acting is not just to secure Prestwick Airport and the jobs that depend on it for the short term, but to do so for the long term, to make sure that that airport, which is such an important part of the ayrshire and Scottish economies, has a long-term future. And if there is one message I want to make sure I convey today, it is that the airport is open for business, and we intend that it remains open for business, not just in the short term, but in the long term as well. In terms of Adam Ingram's interesting suggestion for renaming the airport, there's no immediate plans to rename the airport. I'm sure Adam Ingram will appreciate that we have important matters to deal with along the way, but rebranding of the airport may be part of a wider strategy to remarket it and make it more attractive. And as an Ayrshire girl, the Robert Burns reference is not lost on me.
I now have 10 people who want to ask a question of the Deputy First Minister. I very much want to get through everybody on that list. It would be helpful, therefore, if we cut out the preamble, we get to one question, and that way everybody can get an answer and everybody can be called. Mark Griffin.
Presiding Officer, I welcome the action today and support the Government's ambition to bring Prestwick Airport back into profit. Can I ask the Cabinet Secretary what will be the position of the Government if efforts to bring Prestwick Airport back into profit are unsuccessful? Are they willing and indeed able to, under EU rules, to sustain Prestwick Airport in the long term if it does not return to profit?
Cabinet Secretary.
Well, I covered some of this in my speech. We do have to operate in line with the market economy investment principle, and what that does is require us to ensure that public investment yields an appropriate return over time, comparable to that might be achieved by a private investor. So clearly our actions are underpinned by that necessity to bring the airport back into profit and to secure a return on public investment over a period of time. And all of our actions and all of the plans we take forward will be based on the objective of doing that. And I want to emphasise that very much to Parliament. I think it's very important just to be clear, as I was clear in my statement, that the alternative to this, and I'm not being at all dramatic here, the very real alternative to the action that the Government is taking today was the closure of Prestwick Airport, with all of the economic and employment consequences that would have gone with that. So I don't underestimate the challenge that lies ahead. I referred in my statement to the opinion of the independent financial and aviation experts that we have already commissioned to do some work for us on this. The objective that we are seeking to meet here will be challenging, but it is possible, and I hope that we have the support of all sides of the chamber as we take forward this venture, which I know members support, which is to secure the future of this airport.
Chick Brodie, followed by Willie Coffey.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. May I thank the Deputy First Minister for a most acceptable statement. Last week I had the privilege of hosting, together with Scots company Caledonian Aviation, 2 major aircraft recycling companies from Arkansas in the USA. They were considering investment in Prestwick.
We just got a question, Mr Brodie.
I'm coming to the question. There's a potential for 200 jobs plus in recycling aircraft and their parts. Doesn't this kind of potential investment confirm Prestwick Airport, with its hinterland of great aerospace engineering skills and Ayrshire's colleges, have huge potential as the European maintenance, repair and overhaul airport, in addition to its other passenger and cargo capabilities?
Cabinet Secretary.
Can I thank Chick Brodie for his questions and recognise the interest he's shown over a period of time in the future of Prestwick Airport. I think he is absolutely right. We are aware of the interest in recycling aircraft that has been shown by the particular company he refers to, and would be very keen and are very keen to continue discussions in that direction. It goes back to what I said to John Scott, that we want to encourage any business that sees potential for doing business at Prestwick to come forward, and we'll be very happy, and Scottish Enterprise in particular will be very happy to have those discussions. I think Chick Brodie is right about the potential here for a cluster, a centre of excellence. Prestwick is already home to MRO facilities, principally for Ryanair, but also on a smaller scale for British Airways. The aerospace cluster around Prestwick is also hugely important. And I think with the right attitude, the right mindset, the right support, there is a real potential to capitalise on that excellence and look to have that very much at the centre of Prestwick's plans for the future. So I welcome Chick Brodie's suggestions there, and will certainly be taking these forward.
Willie Coffey, followed by Jim.
Thank you. Can the Deputy First Minister offer, even at this early stage, an indication that we will begin to develop Prestwick's potential, not only in a Scottish context for our tourism industry, but also to develop its international future?
Cabinet Secretary.
Well, the Scottish Government and our partners will be very focused on developing the business plan, as I've already said. I believe that Prestwick has got a big role to play in the future, not just in its own right, but as part of the wider aviation industry in Scotland. We're very blessed with fantastic airports in other parts of the country. Prestwick has a part to play in that. But that will, as I said in my statement, require us to increase the passenger transport. It will require us to increase the freight transport. It will require us to think of other business opportunities around Prestwick. There are surplus assets around the airport that will also play a part in an overall business development plan for the airport. So all of that has to be taken into account as we move forward to try to move the airport from where it is just now into the position of profitability that we can and do believe is possible. And that involves domestic transport, but it also involves international transport as well.
Jim Hume, followed by Aileen McLeod.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. Just regarding Prestwick, you mentioned that it's a commercial aerospace and it's very important to the area. And there's many companies rely on it, such as Ryanair, whose profits are up to over £500 million. What discussions has she had with organisations like Ryanair regarding keeping Prestwick open?
Cabinet Secretary.
But Ryanair is a customer of Prestwick-Airport, and it will remain very important to the future of Prestwick-Airport. But obviously, as well as talking to Ryanair, we will want to talk to a whole range of private sector businesses that can do business in one form or another with Prestwick. As I indicated in my statement, we have been engaged in a number of discussions in recent weeks and months, principally to try to help facilitate a sale to a private sector consortium. I make no bones about the fact that my preference for the future of Prestwick Airport has been sale to the private sector rather than bringing it into public ownership. But if you're asking me, is public ownership preferable to the closure of the airport, then most definitely it is. But Ryanair remains very important to the future of the airport, but the airport's future will be best catered for if we are dealing with a number of different private sector businesses to make sure that we are capitalising on the full potential of it.
Aileen McLeod, followed by Margaret McDougall.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. Last year's York Aviation Report on the impact of air passenger duty pointed out that Prestwick Airport is the most affected in percentage terms. Does the Cabinet Secretary believe this could have contributed to the current situation, given that the entire aviation industry, the airlines and the airport operators are all desperate to see action on air passenger duty?
Cabinet Secretary.
Yes, I do believe that APD is a particular factor in the position Prestwick finds itself in. Obviously, APD is not just a factor for Prestwick, but nevertheless, the scale of APD does weigh on the decisions that companies, air traffic companies have when they're making decisions whether or not to open up new routes, for example. So I will continue to try to lobby the UK Government to see sense on APD. But short of that, I look forward to the day when this Parliament can take decisions on APD that make more sense, not just for Prestwick Airport, but for all of our airports, so that we can properly capitalise on their economic potential and the tourism potential and the business potential that comes from them.
Margaret McDougall, followed by Maureen Watt.
I too welcome the statement today, given the importance of Prestwick Airport to the Ayrshire and Scottish economies. Given that the three Ayrshire local authorities have committed £2 million each, will they be partners in the Scottish Government's bid, and what role will they play if the bid is successful?
Cabinet Secretary.
I won't speak on behalf of the Ayrshire councils at the moment in terms of what, if any, financial commitment they may be willing to make. I'll leave those discussions, I think, for to have direct with the councils. But Margaret McDougall is right. The three Ayrshire councils have been working very hard with us to try to facilitate a private sector sale, but they have also been working very hard with us to ensure that we have contingency plans in place for the scenario that we now find ourselves in. I want to put on record my thanks to South Ayrshire, to North Ayrshire and to East Ayrshire councils for the very constructive way that they have been working with us, and to say, as I did in my statement, that their continued support and participation in this venture going forward is very important. That's not just a case of financial support, obviously, but that support in a range of different ways will be very important as we try to turn Prestwick around. And I can give the member an assurance that we will be talking. I spoke to the leader of South Ayrshire Council just shortly before I came into the chamber, and we will be speaking to all councils on an ongoing basis.
Maureen Watt, followed by Alex Johnson.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. When the airport is returned to profit, is it absolutely necessary that the airport is sold back into private ownership? Is it not possible that a profitable venture can stay in the public ownership with profits returning to the public purse? And if not, will the Cabinet Secretary ensure all public investment in the interim is recouped with interest?
Cabinet Secretary.
Well, Maureen Watt is absolutely right. I mean, there are various models for the ownership of airports that could be feasible and viable. And at this stage in our plans for Prestwick, it probably is premature to start talking about what happens at the end of a period of public ownership. As I said repeatedly throughout this statement so far and in answer to questions, our intention is to earn a return on public investment. It's very important that we do that. And there is a public interest here, obviously, to the people of Ayrshire, the people who work in and surround Prestwick Airport. But I think there is a bigger public interest in ensuring the future of Prestwick Airport. But I will certainly take on board the point she makes. I referred to a number of airports in England and Wales that are either partially or wholly owned by the public sector, which demonstrates the point she's making, that there are a range of possible ownership models for the future. But our principal objective is to get into ownership and then start the hard work, but the serious work of turning Prestwick around and bringing it back into profit.
Alex Johnson, followed by Neil Booby.
Through the waves of optimism, the Cabinet Secretary has demonstrated her clear understanding of the fact that this deal may have to pick its way through a minefield of state aid rules. Given Prestwick's close proximity to Glasgow Airport and the fact that it relies on a single commercial passenger operator as its largest major customer, is there some danger that the commercial relationship, which may already exist between the airport and its biggest customer, will, if it goes into public ownership, render this itself a breach of state aid rules?
Cabinet Secretary.
Well, can I give an assurance to Alex Johnson, and I hope, and he indeed alluded to this, I hope I made it clear that we are very acutely aware of the state aid implications of any action to invest public money in a commercial venture. That's why I took time in my statement to talk through the market economy investment principle, which guides all of our actions here. So we are very mindful of this, and at every step of the way will be mindful of our requirements in terms of state aid rules and regulations. And I want to give the member that assurance. In terms of his reference to Glasgow Airport, again, I believe, and I said this in my statement, I believe that Prestwick Airport has a future as part of the wider aviation industry. I don't believe that a successful Prestwick has to be or will be at the expense of our other airports. I believe that all of these airports can thrive with the proper business planning in place and with the proper support and proper approach, and that's what we intend to do. And hopefully that gives some assurance as well to other airports who are also operating in a very competitive environment. So we will operate on a commercial basis. We will do so very mindfully of our obligations under state aid, and we will do so with the intention not just of seeing Prestwick Airport thrive, but seeing Prestwick Airport thrive as part of the bigger aviation sector in Scotland.
Neil Bibby, followed by Patrick Harvey.
The Cabinet Secretary has mentioned the need to secure additional passenger business. One way of doing this would be to connect Prestwick Airport through the rail network to the rest of Scotland by going ahead with the Glasgow Crossrail project. Will the Scottish Government reassess the positive impact Crossrail could have in light of the need to generate more passenger business at Prestwick and the other potential benefits it could bring to Ayrshire, Renfrewshire and even Glasgow Airport as well?
Cabinet Secretary.
Well, one of the advantages I think Prestwick does have as an airport is that it's got a railway station right on its doorstep, and a rail line that runs right to Glasgow Central, a rail line I've used many times myself. I'm sure many other members have. So, let's look at that as a positive and one of the advantages we can build on it. It's also fair to say the railway station requires some investment at Prestwick, but nevertheless, it's one of the things we can use to the airport's advantage. I mean, clearly, we are a government that wants to integrate various modes of transport and our various transport facilities and transport assets as much as possible. But today is very much about taking decisive action to safeguard an airport that was under a very credible threat of closure. I'm glad that the members opposite have welcomed that, and I look forward to suggestions coming from any quarter of this chamber about how we go about the work of ensuring Prestwick for the long term and how we do that as part of the bigger picture. And I'd certainly be happy to hear those suggestions from wherever they might come.
Patrick Harvey.
I know.
Thank you. Does the Deputy First Minister agree that a publicly owned airport should achieve the same employment standards as the rest of the public sector? Will she give a clear guarantee that no one working at a publicly owned Prestwick will be paid less than the living wage or will be exploited by means of a zero-hour contract?
Cabinet Secretary.
Well, I'm sure these are points of detail that we'll come back to as we go further into this venture. But can I say to Patrick Harvey, in absolutely accepting the sentiment behind his question, that I'm standing here today taking the action and announcing to Parliament the action I'm taking principally from a desire to safeguard vital employment in Prestwick and in the wider Ayrshire economy. So I hope that gives a very strong sense of the importance that we attach to these jobs. And one of the things about the jobs that we're talking about at Prestwick is that they're not just jobs, they're high quality jobs in many respects, and these are exactly the kind of jobs we want to retain in not just the Ayrshire economy but the Scottish economy. So as a government that has promoted the living wage in the Scottish Government and our own agencies, I don't think our commitment to that is in any doubt. But I hope Patrick Harvey will forgive me that we're at the start of a process here. The staff of Prestwick-Airport were being advised of developments today by senior management at the airport in tandem to this statement, and it's absolutely right that we work with them as we go forward here to secure their employment and to secure the future of the facility that they work in.
Thank you. That ends the statement and questions with the Cabinet Secretary. My apology to the one member who didn't get called. The next item of business is a debate on motion number 7939 in the name of Angela Constance on the Commission for Developing Scotland's Young Workforce interim report. Members who wish to speak in this debate should press the request to speak button now.
Can I advise members at the start of this debate that it's oversubscribed, we're extremely tight for time. I call on Angela Constance to speak to and move the motion. Minister, 13 minutes.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. In January of this year, the Government set up the Independent Commission for Developing Scotland's Young Workforce under the leadership of Sir Ian Wood. And at the halfway point of the Commission's work, it has published an interim report which has received widespread endorsement from the education and business communities and which has caught the imagination of many. And I very much welcome the interim report in terms of the extent to which the Commission has already made progress, in terms of the vision it has set out around vocational education, and in terms of the very practical steps it has outlined in its recommendations. And while the report calls for a set of evolutionary steps, overall it is hugely ambitious on behalf of all of our young people. I think there are many exciting aspects of this report, but above all else it lays out a realistic blueprint for how we might move to an education system which sets out clear and attractive pathways which can take young people from school into employment. And Scotland, I believe, has a good recent record on addressing youth unemployment, but I want our long-term approach to boosting youth employment to be amongst the best in the world. And we have been making progress on increasing attainment, but I want the opportunity gaps that we see in our society eradicated. We have some very well developed and well understood pathways for young people, but I want all of our educational and training pathways to be understood and held in high regard by everyone. This report, I believe, makes a significant contribution to meeting all of these aspirations. And the report highlights a number of drivers which it believes makes the delivery of its recommendations possible. The flexibility of the senior phase of Curriculum for Excellence, the regionalisation of our college sector and the growth in modern apprenticeships are all clearly identified as important drivers for delivery. And these are all reforms which this government has undertaken, and they build on the progress of Scottish education that this Parliament has delivered since devolution. This means we have a platform to build a world-class vocational education and training system which we can proudly place alongside our world-class higher education system for the benefit of all our young people, our employers and, of course, Scotland's economic well-being. Presiding Officer, there are many issues that we can disagree about in this Parliament at a political level, but I know that across this Parliament there is a consensus that our young people's future should not be one of those issues that we dispute. We all want our young people to be able to make the most of their talents. We all want to benefit from the contribution that a highly skilled and well-motivated young workforce can make to our country's success. And we all want to avoid the situation where young people suffer the long-term scars of unemployment at an early age. And that's why, as a government, as we consider the Commission's interim report in partnership with COSLA, I was very keen to give Parliament an early opportunity to contribute to how the recommendations might be taken forward. That is a process that we can start today, and one which I want to sustain with you all over the coming months ahead. Presiding Officer, while I believe we are starting from a strong base here in Scotland, I do think there is much we can learn from other countries. I recently visited Switzerland and Germany to see for myself how their vocational education and training systems help drive low levels of youth unemployment. And both countries expose young people to the workplace at an early age. Both countries place great importance on well-understood, high-quality vocational pathways. And in both countries, employers are seen as part of the education system and view themselves as such. And I was struck by the widely held understanding that educationalists and industry need to work together to prepare young people for life after school. And it was very apparent to me that there was a clear understanding also of what it is like to be 16 and of the support that our young people need to develop a whole host of attributes required to move successfully into adult life. And there was also in these countries a clear understanding that early exposure to the workplace helped build these attributes amongst young people. And there's no doubt that we all have empathy towards our young people. We have all been there. Admittedly, for some of us, that was longer than we'd care to remember, but most of us will have young people in our lives. And I look forward with particular interest to the Commission's further recommendations on bringing employers much closer to the education system. And I know there is an appetite among employers in Scotland to do more, and I know the Commission will focus on how we can make that possible. Now, Presiding Officer, yes, certainly.
Jenny Mara. Thank the Minister for giving way. She's talking about experiences we can learn from other countries. Has the Minister considered, or would she be interested in considering, some of the German policy around statutory requirements on hiring young people?
Minister.
I think as the Commission proceeds with the second phase of its work, some of those issues about statutory requirements, there is of course a great interest on how Germany, who, despite a global economic recession, have actually seen youth unemployment fall. So there's a great interest in countries like Germany and how they have achieved that. Because what I'm clear about is that what we need to be building a system that ensures a clearer progression for young people from school into work in the good times as well as the bad. We need a system that's going to be robust enough that when the economy is up or down, that our young people actually get the best start to their working lives. It's not for me to preempt the work of the Commission in its second phase, but in the second phase, I have no doubts they will be looking at many countries, Germany amongst them, on how we proceed to a system that, as Sir Ian Wood describes, where employers are not just passive recipients of education, they are actually integrally involved in the education and training of our young people. Presiding Officer, given what I've said already, I hope it is clear that I am enthusiastic about the Commission's interim recommendations. Clearly, detailed consideration will have to be given to each recommendation and to the implementation challenges that may exist. But I want to welcome the opportunity to work with COSLA on this, and I also welcome the early engagement that leaders across the education sector are already having with each other. I won't go through them all, but I would like to highlight some of the recommendations. For example, the focus on informing young people about the opportunities across the world of work from an early stage of their secondary education, in my view, is critical. I'm particularly interested in the recommendations on STEM and the growth sectors in this regard. It is essential that we inspire young people around the opportunities to pursue careers in those parts of the economy where their chances of a long-term rewarding career is the greatest. And this has to involve teachers, career advisors, employers, parents and guardians working together to inspire young people about the possibilities that lie ahead. And this has to be underpinned by strong pathways that help young people reach for those opportunities. And at the launch of the Commission's interim report, Linda Mackay, the Vice Chair of the Commission, spoke about the unique opportunity the Commission has had to look across schools, colleges and modern apprenticeships. And I think by taking this approach, the Commission has highlighted a number of possibilities to smooth transitions for young people and put all of our young people in a better position to move confidently and ambitiously towards rewarding employment from the senior phase onwards. And our college reform programme has, over the last 2 years, seen a remarkable transformation in the shape of the sectors, and leaders in this new sector are continuing to realise the opportunities that regionalisation presents. And the Commission is clear that colleges should focus on employability of their learners through closer links with industry. And this is a central principle of our regionalisation agenda. A little over 2 years ago now, in putting learners at the centre, we proposed that the role of further education should be providing people with the skills that they need to get a job, keep a job, or get a better job and develop a good career, however near or far they are from the labour market. Presiding Officer, this is the whole point. Young people go to college and indeed engage in education, at least in part to enhance their career prospects. Employment outcomes are therefore a fundamental indicator not only of a college's success, but also of the success of the education system as a whole. The Commission has rightly identified the need to provide opportunities and support for all young people, irrespective of their backgrounds. And the Government has asked the Commission to place the equality agenda at the very heart of its work, and I know it is determined to make meaningful recommendations across education and employment in its final report to help address inequalities in terms of employment outcomes. An interim report highlights, for example, the success of activity agreements in supporting some of our most vulnerable and disadvantaged young people, and calls for that approach to be extended where appropriate to those aged under 16. And while the Commission helpfully makes recommendations to bring careers advice forward, it is important to recognise that the Career Modernisation Programme aims to maintain universal support for all young people while providing more intensive support for those who need it most. And in the reports forward, Sir Ian refers to attainment for all, and the Government has made improving attainment a central element of its education strategy. And a number of these recommendations, if implemented well, will help us realise our ambition for Scotland to be the best place to go to school, where every young person can enjoy an education that encourages them to be the most successful they can be and provides them with a full passport to future opportunity. It is very interesting, I think, that the report doesn't contain the term parity of esteem, but there can be little doubt to anybody who has read the report that the Commission members believe passionately in the importance of both vocational and higher education to our young people, our economy and to our society. They say it clearly in the report and whenever they speak about their work. However, rather than simply calling for greater parity of esteem between vocational and academic education, as many others have in the past, the Commission has laid out a number of practical steps that it thinks will help bring this about. And ultimately, by delivering these well and demonstrating the enhanced employment outcomes of those following the vocational pathways the Commission outlines, we will start to see a shift in the outmoded culture that the report quite rightly refers to.
Final minute, Minister.
The Commission's work, Presiding Officer, is only half finished, and it will indeed focus on employers and equality issues between now and early next year. However, I very much believe that we have to take this interim report seriously, so the work begins now to implement it. And working in partnership with COSLA, I plan to work with the Commission to bring together leaders from across the education system and beyond to consider the recommendations and their implementation. So this national summit, which Sir Ian Wood will chair, will focus on the issues raised by the interim report, and I invite members of this Parliament with an interest to attend the summit, which will take place at the turn of the year. Presiding Officer, I'm very much looking forward to today's debate, and I'm sure that it will reflect the wide-ranging interest in the Commission's work, and today's debate will undoubtedly help inform the Government's thinking on the interim report as we consider the recommendations in partnership with COSLA in advance of the Commission's final report next year, and I move the motion in my name.
Thank you very much. And to now call on Jenny Mara to speak to and move Amendment 7939.1, maximum 9 minutes.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. I'm pleased to take my place for the first time in the Chamber today as Shadow Minister for Youth Employment for Labour at a critical time for Scotland's economy and Scotland's unemployed young people. And I would like at the outset to accept the Minister's kind invitation to the summit at the turn of the year, because Labour believes that any and every initiative to address the scourge of youth unemployment in Scotland is necessary, and we want to be part of that conversation. It is a widely accepted fact that the recession has hit young people disproportionately hard. Over the summer, we learned that another 32,000 young people were out of work, up from 61,000 to 93,000 in Scotland.
Yeah. Minister.
I'm grateful to Ms Mara on taking a point of intervention. It was very remiss of me earlier not to acknowledge that this is our first outing in our new portfolio position. So I do appreciate it. Can I suggest to her that while we can be absolutely united that youth unemployment remains too high, that she should not, of course, misuse ONS statistics, particularly for young people, when we know that the only comparison in labour market stats for young people can be year on year, and the year-on-year statistics shows that youth unemployment in Scotland has fallen. It's still too high, and on that I hope we can unite.
Jenny Mara.
I thank the Minister for her intervention. I will check my statistics, but I am quite confident that the figures I'm using are correct. Our youth unemployment rate in Scotland is persistently around 20%. I think that's a figure we can all agree on. An unacceptable figure by any standards, and one that demands a swift and bold response from government. And I come to this debate with experience of youth unemployment in my own region. In Dundee, the number of 18 to 24-year-olds claiming job seekers allowance for over 6 months is 250% higher than it was in August 2007. And when I speak to young people who have been out of work for long periods of time, I hear the same desire to work, the same aspiration to succeed as I see in those who have found work straight from education. Yet, when I speak to employers in key sectors like engineering, I hear the same story again and again from business, that our young people do not have the right skills to fill the vacancies they have. Now, there is clearly a gap here. This is a gap that we all need to work together to bridge, and I think the Wood Commission's proposals are very useful in that regard. One engineering company in Dundee has developed its own training facility because young people aren't being taught the skills in college that the company needs. And it is clear that we must be smarter in how we match opportunities for young people with business demands in key sectors like engineering and technology. As the Wood Commission interim report makes clear, that won't happen without a shift in how the government delivers the skills required for young people to thrive in these sectors. The report states, We must move from our ingrained and frankly ill-informed culture that somehow vocational education is an inferior option. We agree with this on these benches, and I was very pleased to hear the Minister agree with this in her opening remarks. The National Union of Students in Scotland also argue that for too long going straight from university into work has been the accepted route into a career in Scotland, with vocational education seen as an inferior or less prestigious option. And they, like the Wood Commission, argue that we need to move towards that parity of a scheme for vocational education. Now, there are a number of steps in the Commission's report that the Government can take to help reach that parity. Starting with schools, the report states we should be offering training and education relevant to the modern apprenticeship framework. We should be providing work experience opportunities and giving young people the opportunity to study for a national certificate. But it also states, and I think this is critical, that careers advice must be available earlier than S4. Whether it is access to the World of Work website, one-to-one interviews, exposure to business and industry presentations, workplace visits perhaps, the reality is that some routes, if not closed off, might not immediately be accessible from S4 if the pupils don't already have the qualifications they needed to take in S3 and S4. They might then have the option of picking up these qualifications at college, but if guidance and advice had been available earlier, so they kept their options open as wide as possible for the careers they were interested in when they made decisions at S2, we might see more productive outcomes for our system, but more importantly for the young people moving through school and college. Perhaps the most important and wide-ranging recommendations in the report revolve around our colleges. And as we move to the regional model, the group argue that regional outcome agreements must commit to ongoing quality improvement in the delivery of vocational education. It argues that we must strengthen the role colleges play in the modern apprenticeship programme, and we must also strengthen the link between schools and colleges as they begin to integrate vocational education into the curriculum for excellence. It argues that colleges must be more vocationally focused, working with local businesses to determine what skills are needed and delivering them throughout the courses that they offer. It also argues that work experience should form a core part of college courses where this is appropriate. Now, Wood's report is clear that in order to make the necessary changes contained within the report, our colleges must be empowered with resources from government. And this is what Labour's amendment reiterates this afternoon. On the need to resource change in our colleges, Colleges Scotland have said the Scottish Government's flat cash settlement for 14-15 and the proposed small increase for 15-16 will allow the college sector to broadly continue what it is providing currently. But it also means that any new activity can only be done at the expense of current activity. Now, I'm delighted that the Government has indicated that they may support our amendment today. And so I would also invite the Minister to reflect on how much money the Government will be providing to resource the changes in our colleges that are envisaged in the recommendations of the Wood Commission. And as an example, I would draw attention to the fact that to provide careers advice and guidance early on in the school curriculum will take investment in Skills Development Scotland, but we have already seen in John Swinney's draft budget a cut to the SDS budget. So I wonder how we're going to address that in the next couple of years. But I expect that some of these proposals will be costed in the next draft of the budget, and we will hear from the Finance Minister on that. Presiding Officer, there are many more recommendations in the interim report that are worthy of discussion, and I look forward to hearing them this afternoon. I know a number of my Labour colleagues will address them. Labour will support the Government's motion tonight as we welcome the thrust of the report, and we will of course work together with them at the summit and with industry leaders in taking forward the recommendations of the Wood Commission. However, we do believe that words must be backed by action, and I look forward to hearing how the Government will resource these recommendations in the next draft of the budget. Presiding Officer, I'd like to move the amendment in my name.
Many thanks. And I now call on Liz Smith to speak to and move Amendment 7939.2, maximum 6 minutes.
Thank you, Deputy Presiding Officer, and can I also congratulate Jenny Mara on her new post. In an education debate in this Parliament in 2002, we voted overwhelmingly to allow much greater flexibility within the senior school and college curriculum. And we also voted to back a Scottish Conservative amendment, overwhelmingly I have to say, which said that we should allow pupils from the age of 14 to have new opportunities within our colleges and businesses so that they could develop a vocational or technical skill or learn a trade. We argued then, and we will argue again today, that Scottish education has been stuck in too much of a structural straitjacket when it comes to responding to the needs of the widest diversity of pupils and fostering their ambition. The Conservatives have over a long period of time argued that this part of the equation is greater diversity of educational institution, which allows for greater choice and flexibility, and it is for these reasons that we have been greatly encouraged by the interim report from the Wood Commission, a commission which we believe has produced a report that contains a coherent vision for the future because it draws its evidence from what works best. That is not to say that there haven't been lots of good things happening over recent years. The Modern Apprenticeship Programme, the Opportunities for All Programme, the projects set up by various chambers of commerce, Jim McCall's initiative at Newlands Junior College, and the Skills Academy like Queen Margaret University Hospitality and Tourism Academy, they have all played a valuable part in extending opportunities. But the vast majority of young people continue to be faced with an outdated comprehensive system of schooling, which in our view denies them the diversity and choice that are required. And Scotland has been rather stuck with the educational myth that to provide everyone with equality of opportunity, educational institutions must all be run with a similar structure. That is a dangerous misconception. Of course.
Cabinet Secretary.
She's saying, and I noted her statement last night, saying that we need to make radical changes to the structure of education. The Wood Committee report says, our proposals don't require time-consuming, expensive restructuring of the education system. Would you like to square that circle?
Liz Smith.
I'm very happy to square that because I think inherent in some of his other suggestions, he is making a point at actually changing. Forgive me, Cabinet Secretary, I think there are aspects of suggestions that he's making that do require a change of culture, and along with that change of culture comes some other changes, and that's very clear from Cabinet Secretary, you keep pointing to the various bits. I can point to other parts of the Wood Commission where I think he is making a very, very important suggestions about that. And can I also say, the Cabinet Secretary, that one of the reasons why Ruth Davidson focused on this at the Conservative Party conference is about our determination to tackle the poverty of choice, which is something that Sir Ian Wood does focus on, that affects too many of our school children as they enter the middle and secondary and senior years of secondary schools. And we can't get away from a lot of the statistics that are flagged up by Sir Ian Wood. 1 in 6 of them leaving school without being properly literate. Almost half of young people in Scotland, he says, are leaving school without a higher qualification. 1 in 4 of Scottish businesses are finding it very difficult to hire people straight from education. And as Jenny Mara said herself, we're looking at a figure of about 20% of the 16 to 24-year-olds within that total of unemployment.
Michael Russell.
She's quoted in school education, I think a little suspect, but Ian Wood says the introduction of curriculum for excellence in primary schools in S1, S3 is already making a difference, as a new approach to teaching and learning is helping pupils to develop many of the skills and attributes they will need to be successful. And it says it can be done without splitting young people off into separate streams. That is not what the member is saying.
I'm not talking about streaming, Cabinet Secretary. I'll come to that in a minute. What he is saying very clearly is a need to raise the bar. And he's talking about a different kind of thinking, a different kind of culture. And that is something that we entirely agree with, because for us, there has been a significant movement towards change. And a lot of the credit of that goes to people who you've asked to set up reports, whether that's Keir Bloomer or Graham Donaldson or David Cameron. They have been very thought-provoking about the need for subtle changes within Scottish education, and I understand that COSLA is looking to embrace some of that change. And I remember distinctly, I think it was in 2009, when SNP councillor David Berry in East Lothian said that the Scottish Government ought to do some pretty unconventional things when it comes to changing the structure of school education. These are ideas about which we are very interested. Now, the Minister mentioned about the interest that we can get from other countries. The systems which attract the Scottish Conservatives are very much those from Denmark, from Germany, from Switzerland and from New Zealand. And we do that because of the statistics, but also because of some of the differences that they have managed to strike. In Germany, 8.1% of economically active 15 to 24-year-olds are currently unemployed. That's the lowest level in the EU. In Denmark, it's 14%, and in Switzerland, it's 9.2%. 85% of the population in Germany between 25 and 64 has at least an upper secondary qualification. In Switzerland, it's 86%, and in Denmark, it's 77%. And inherent within these systems is greater pupil career choice, not just subject choice or different course choice, but what kind of school is actually best for them as they develop their own specialist talents.
Final 30 seconds.
Which need not depend on only their academic credentials. And we are very attracted by what Sir Ian is saying about that change. And I think, Cabinet Secretary, that there is an underlying desire amongst the Commission to make us think out with the box and to look at different kinds of institutions. In moving the amendment in my name, Presiding Officer, can I just restate that the Scottish Conservatives are very committed to the basic principles of the Wood Commission, but also to have a look at an overhaul of some of the key institutions of this country that will raise our game and provide all our young people with much better opportunities than they receive from a Scottish Government just now, which is, quite frankly, too obsessed with state control.
Thank you very much. We now turn to the open debate. At this stage, it is speeches of 6 minutes, but that may change in the course of the debate. I call Claire Adamson to be followed by Ken McIntosh, and I ask members to address the remarks this afternoon through the Chair. Thank you.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. European and External Relations Committee took evidence last week from the Lithuanian Ambassador Asta Liushkemi on Lithuania's priorities for the presidency of the EU. And I was very pleased to hear that economic growth and employment were at the core of their priorities, and youth employment and youth employability is of great concern. We welcome the Ambassador's acknowledgement of the work being done in Scotland to tackle the issue and she recognised the contribution of our Minister for Youth Employment, Angela Constance, in actually taking our case to Europe at committee level, and that was to be welcomed. So I'm very glad to be called today because I think this is hugely important as we discuss the Commission for Developing Scotland's Young Workforce Interim Report. And I was very glad that the Wood Report sets out what we are doing in Scotland at the moment. We're not standing still by any means in this area, and the Curriculum for Excellence in School is being embedded and rolled out across our schools, and that's a hugely important change to the way we educate our young people. And also the regionalisation of our colleges has also given us a focus and the ability to secure better outcomes across regions. And of course the greatest focus on our modern apprenticeships, which are very popular and seem to have been very successful in widening apprenticeships across different sectors and are in great demand in our economy. And also the commitment by this government for the opportunities for all in a place of learning for all 16 to 19-year-olds not in employment, education or training. So we're in a very, very good position to be examining these issues at this point in time. I would like to have addressed all of the recommendations, but I don't think I'll have time to do that this afternoon. So I will do them by jumping to the very end, to the area that is of particular interest to me as someone who worked in the IT industry for 20 years and has a specific interest in STEM areas. And I was really glad to see that the recommendation 11 is that a focus on STEM should sit at the heart of the development of Scotland's young workforce. And I think this is a really, really important point. However, we have to also consider that we do have issues in Scotland on this area. The Royal Society of Scotland's report, Tapping All Our Talents, looked at women in STEM subjects and the issue that even people who train in STEM subjects, women often leave the workplace later on. And it's a very complex area, and I think there is work still to be done in this area. I'm very glad that STEM ambassadors are being deployed in schools to try and engage young people, especially young women, in careers in this area. The Cabinet Secretary at Committee this morning reminded us that 1 in 5 higher education places is delivered by our colleges, and that funding and research and development are going to be key as we move forward. It was very welcoming to see that Scotland has 4 of the top universities in the top 100 in the world. And it's interesting that Sweden have this same ranking. However, Scotland tends to follow what the UK spending is on research and development, which sits at 1.7% of GDP, whereas Sweden, as an independent nation, have a spending of 3.4% of GDP. And I think in everything that we should do, we should be considering that what the opportunities of independence could give us in moving towards the European target of 3% of GDP, because this is certainly an area in which the UK is underperforming. I also have a concern about where we are with our colleges at the moment, and obviously this debate is about the future. But if we look at the college performance indicators from the Scottish Funding Council published in March in 2013, these are very encouraging in the areas of computing and ICT, where we have, and in engineering, especially where we have a 75% completed successful outcomes there. But in science, it is at the lowest level at 52% of completed successful areas and only 74% complete partial success, and also one of the lowest rates of uptakes in terms of the HMIE subject groupings for courses lasting 160 hours or more. Yes, certainly.
Kezia Dugdale.
I welcome the member's concerns about colleges. I wonder if she shares the concern with Joanne Lamont around the falling number of women and part-time students at colleges across Scotland.
Claire Adamson, you're approaching your last minute.
Well, I think we have been discussing that at committee, and we've also been looking at this area. And I do think that in the current climate, that the focus on young people in the age group that we've been concerning is absolutely the right decision that the government will take to focus on these areas. I can't go into all of the key recommendations, but I do think that we're on very good footing. If we look at recommendation number 10, the support for young people at risk of disengaging from education, is a focus. And this is a hugely concerning area because these are the most hard to reach young people that we have. And I would like to put on record how grateful I am that we did pass the bill last year on the college regionalisation, that we included the data sharing aspect, which for the first time gives us an opportunity to look at the destinations of our young people and gives us an opportunity to actually engage with them at an earlier point in their careers in actually keeping them on the right pathway or a changed pathway, but either of which would lead for a better outcome for them in the long run. So I welcome the report and I welcome the government's response this afternoon. Thank you.
Many thanks. I call Ken McIntosh to be followed by John Mason.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. And the interim report of the Wood Commission we are discussing today is an excellent contribution to the debate on youth unemployment, and it makes a series of not just useful but I hope achievable recommendations. So can I both welcome the Commission's report and the Government, congratulate the Government on bringing together a range of talented individuals from various backgrounds. Now I want to focus on two areas from the interim report: colleges and links with schools. Before I do, I want to briefly restate why finding a solution to our youth unemployment crisis is so important. In Scotland today, a fifth of all young people, some 84,000 people, are out of work. 18% of young people on out-of-work benefits have been claiming for more than a year. And across Scotland, of course, there are wide variations. A Scottish-wide youth unemployment rate of 7.2% masks a level of almost double that in North Ayrshire, Clackmannanshire and East Ayrshire. So there's a pressing need to use the powers of this Parliament to change course and prevent a lost generation of young people experiencing the scarring effect of unemployment. I'm aware that many MSPs are already doing what they can as individuals, running job fairs and workshops, for example. And in my own constituency, I'm currently running a work experience programme alongside my Westminster colleague Jim Murphy. We're asking local businesses to take on a young person for a period of work experience, then offering those placements to young people who are out of work benefits. It's just a small contribution to the problem, one that I hope would lift hopes and boost confidence. Sir Ian's report emphasises the benefits of improving employability through education and skills, as well as using work experience programmes. And over the long term, this will make Scotland itself a more attractive place to do business. But I also recognise in the short term that employability cannot be the only answer when unemployment and a lack of jobs is the real problem. And of course, much of the discussion on greater collaboration between schools and further education is not new. 10 years ago, the Scottish Executive reported on building the foundations of a lifelong learning society, a review of collaboration between schools and further education colleges in Scotland. It called for taster courses, non-traditional national qualifications and access to after-school and evening classes at further education institutions as a pathway into colleges for senior school students. Here we are 10 years on, and the Wood Commission repeats calls for a renewed focus on colleges in the provision of further education and in linking up schools with schools to deliver new pathways in learning. Yes, I will do.
Liz Smith.
Would the member also agree that one of the things that Sir Ian has recognised is the need for businesses, particularly small to medium-sized businesses, taking more of a lead and responsibility when it comes to taking on these young people?
Ken McIntosh.
A very good point. One, I don't have time for my own contribution, but the Determined to Succeed programme was all about getting those business people into the classroom. And I think that the growth and the importance of the small business to our economy needs to be reflected in our schools. I entirely agree with the point Ms Smith makes. But in particular, the Commission notes the importance of having a range of course options, not just full-time places. And flexibility is essential, whether to support those already in part-time work to gain qualifications or to support people with additional support needs, for example, to access learning opportunities. And Presiding Officer, no matter how consensual we like to be, and we would like to be on this subject today, it's impossible not to point out that this approach simply does not align with the Scottish Government's current actions. Their further education agenda has resulted in 120,000 fewer students at college. It's meant spending £60 million getting rid of college lecturers and staff, and it has meant a halving of courses for people with additional support needs. Mr Russell.
Cabinet Secretary.
Inadvertently misrepresent the report. I draw his attention to page 5, the bullet points. Curriculum for Excellence is the first one. The second was the move to larger regional colleges with more focus on regional labour markets and a greater emphasis on employment outcomes. And the reason it's mentioned is because it describes it as one of the important drivers for change on which our recommendations can be built. I think in the interest of fairness, it's important to point that out.
Ken McIntosh.
I was hesitant. I'm trying to be consensual, so I was very hesitant about allowing Mr Russell to take an intervention at all. However, I accept the point in the report. I would hope Mr Russell and Ms Conson would also accept the point that there are more than 100,000 fewer Scots going to college than there were just 3 years ago. Just 3 years ago. And the number of pupils with additional support needs who are not going on to college now, I mean, that really is surely something that's recognised by members across this chamber. But I am genuinely supportive of the government for creating the commission and bringing the debate forward. A related issue is around the financial support that is available to support learning in further education sector. The classic example of this is the student working, oh my goodness, at Tesco's and studying part-time at college for a higher education degree, who will receive far less state support than the student studying full-time at university for the same degree, but working part-time at Tesco's to earn income. The NUS make this very point. Support for students at college does not have the same status as university student support. It is discretionary and provided for colleges. It's discretionary, provided on a first-come, first-served basis. And if we want to make further education a genuinely attractive and accessible option, there needs to be greater certainty around the student support we are offering. Presiding Officer, I'm conscious. I want to make one final point if I can. I recently had the point to visit British Airways maintenance operations at Glasgow Airport. A useful visit, I have to say, not just because it was very enjoyable, but because there was a chance to BAE are showing how they engage with children, school children, through STEM subjects, encouraging particularly girls to look forward to a career in engineering. And this type of collaborative work is vital, filling in the gaps where teachers don't have the skills or experience to teach relevant subjects. And there's further scope in this area to teach business and entrepreneurship, not as an abstract subject, but with the practical tools to setting up a business. Presiding Officer, can I thank all of those involved in the Commission. I look forward to the final report. Thank you.
Many thanks. I now call John Mason to be followed by Hansala Malik.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. Of course, in this chamber, we previously debated the Finance Committee's report on employability, so we have discussed some of these issues before, but it is good to get a fresh angle on a number of them, and this is such an important area of looking at our young workforce that we do really need to give it continual attention. To focus on some of the recommendations, 1 and 2 primarily focus on schools, and that is very good. Schools must be aware of the opportunities that are out there for young people later on in life, and having employers going into the schools, I believe, is very useful. Teachers cannot know all the opportunities, but it's still important that they're as up-to-date as possible. However, there does seem to be a big emphasis on skills in the report and not so much emphasis on attitudes. Now, I do believe, and I think the Finance Committee heard previously, that attitude is very important. ASDA, for example, emphasised how when they're recruiting, attitude is one of the key things they look for. And yesterday I visited a local engineering company in my own constituency, which have had apprentices over recent years. They have had some with whom they've had a bad experience, and that has been mainly because of a poor attitude, and they had to let them go. But their current apprentices seem to be doing very well. They were also telling me about an employee in a senior position in the company who started 28 years ago with no qualifications, but his attitude was superb from the start, and he has acquired the necessary skills along the way. And I was pleased to see at the end of this part mention of the importance of parents. I think we've sometimes underemphasised this, and this influence can be both positive and negative. Many young people will be strongly influenced by their parents, so if the parents can be engaged as to current job opportunities, their encouragement to think wider, it can be extremely positive. However, also it has to be said that some parents can have a negative influence. When a youngster is being encouraged at school to go on to college, and the reaction at home is, "Our family doesn't go to college," I think that kind of reaction is becoming less frequent, but sadly it does still happen. Recommendations 3 and 4 concentrate on colleges, and I like to see the emphasis on the local economy, and I accept that can be defined in different ways. When the Finance Committee went down to Dumfries to take evidence, it was Elaine Murray and myself who were there, and we did feel at that time there was a bit of a disconnect between the opportunities locally, for example in hospitality and tourism, but a lack of training opportunities locally in these fields. Recommendation 5 talks about the schools and colleges partnership, and there's mention of the transitional costs. I think because some of the work has to be done earlier, so there would be extra one-off costs. The report suggests that the Scottish Government, local authorities and colleges... yes?
Kezia Dugdale.
Like the member, I was really intrigued in that particular aspect of the report. Does he recognise that further on the report states that those costs would be recouped from schools? Is that an issue that concerns the member?
John Mason.
Well, actually, one of the points I was going to make was where the costs would come from, and I think that is an issue, and I didn't see it in the report exactly where they should come from, but specifically it did say Scottish Government, local authorities and colleges should work together on this. I noticed, though, that there was no mention of business involvement. Now, that struck me as a little bit strange because elsewhere in the report they want business involved, but when it comes to meeting the costs, they don't seem to want business involved. And it specifically says that that would increase productivity, which presumably means that the business would benefit. So it does seem to me that consideration should be given to business contributing at that stage. Recommendation talks about young people at risk of disengaging from education. I have to say I thought this part of the report was a bit weak, and I accept it's only an interim one. I also accept that other studies have been referred to, for example the Smith Group, so there is little point reinventing the wheel. However, the only one solid example they give is activity agreements, and I wondered if we might have expected a bit more than that. This is a hugely important area if we are hoping to help the most disadvantaged young people out of a cycle of several generations not working. Of course, the individual has responsibility for her or himself, but the best examples we've often heard about have where an adult has put a huge amount of time and effort into a young person's life. Looking forward, we're going to get more about equalities, and including disability, and I certainly welcome that. The Equal Opportunities Committee has also done a report recently on women in work, and the subject of girls moving into engineering and the STEM subjects in general has already been mentioned. Now, Inclusion Scotland are a bit critical that disability is going to be looked at later on and should have been included at this stage. But I do feel that's just a little bit unfair of them, perhaps. This is an interim report, it's work in progress, and I think disability is so important that it does deserve a focus in the final report in its own right. Presumably the alternative was not to have an interim report even at all.
Final minute.
Finally, if I can make some general points, the NUS briefing highlights the question of parity of esteem, which has already been quoted, and I think this is absolutely right, and requires a real change of attitude amongst all of us, frankly. Just the other week, I got my boiler replaced, and I have to say with some trepidation, as I knew it was major work. However, I have to say I was hugely impressed, especially by the range of skills possessed by the one-man business who did it. He did the gas work, he did the plumbing work, he did the electrical work, he bricked up the hole in the wall, he did the admin, he did the paperwork, and he even hoovered up the mess at the end. Now, I didn't want a doctor doing that, or a lawyer, or frankly, an accountant. I didn't want anyone with a degree doing that. What I did want was someone with the appropriate skills and training and attitude, and I have to say I was extremely pleased at the result. As a society, we must really learn to value all the skills we have and need. Ranking people artificially will not benefit society as a whole and will not benefit individuals either. I think we should very much welcome this interim report, and I look forward to what is still to come.
Many thanks. I now call Hanzala Malik to be followed by Dennis Robertson, and I ask members to keep to their time.
Good afternoon, Presiding Officer, and first of all, I congratulate Jenny Mara at a new post. I'm sure she'll do everything to support the Parliament achieve its vision. Good luck with that. I also welcome the opportunity to speak about developing Scotland's young workforce and comment on the interim report by Sir Ian Wood. The Commission is looking at ways to improving from education to employment. I wholeheartedly agree that a greater emphasis on vocational qualifications is important and that industry should have an input into what is taught to ensure that their needs are met. On a recent visit to Irvine with the Economic Energy and Tourism Committee, we heard evidence from Bar Construction, who were eager to work with colleges to provide higher quality industrial vocational training. Now I believe that the Scottish Government is guilty of undervaluing vocational training education and have serious concerns about how recommendations of the Commission can be implemented, giving savage cuts to college funding. I feel a large gap in young employability and the skills of acquiring applications for applying for applications for jobs. I have a young constituent who was interested in applying for a place on the Commonwealth Apprenticeship Initiative to be a plumber. The application process was entirely online, and the young man had great difficulty applying as he had not had any training to do so, nor had he had the skills from the school, nor was his family in a position to support him in doing so. Applying online just because you're a young person is confident using social media and email does not mean they have the skill to apply for a job or an apprenticeship. I would like to highlight an excellent example of involving young employability in my constituency. Move On is a charity that runs Fair Share. They got a lottery grant to run the Fair Share volunteering employment project, which helps vulnerable young people in Glasgow to make the transformation from a care system or homelessness to stable adult life. It aims to run the project for over 5 years, helping young people. The participants help the Fair Share Glasgow project. They learn transferable skills, building confidence, acquiring training, and gain work experience, for example, creating CVs and other opportunities. Returning to my original point, I am deeply concerned about colleges' ability to offer employability-focused vocational courses due to the lack of resources. Whilst I continuously remind the government about the waiting lists of colleges' places, it doesn't seem to be in any rush to resolve the issue, and instead we are making even greater demands on colleges. Yes.
Last time the member raised this matter in the chamber, I encouraged him to write to me with details of his constituents who were on those waiting lists so that we could look at the issue that he raises. He has not yet done so. I encourage him to do so again, because only if he brings forward those names will we be able to find out whether those young people are genuinely waiting for a place or what the circumstance is. I make the offer again.
Hanzala Malik.
I don't want to sound harsh, but that's a little insulting. It's not just my constituents who are waiting on waiting lists. If the Cabinet Secretary is serious about his portfolio, all he has to do is ask the colleges and they'll advise him of the lists. I'm happy to provide him with lists that I've received from colleges. It's quite shameful to suggest that the waiting list is only in my constituency. But more importantly, I think the important focus here really is employability. If my constituents cannot go to colleges, They cannot go to universities. They cannot get vocational training. And I think that's quite important. The issue for me is that what I see is large waiting lists in colleges, but the government's not doing anything about them. What are you doing about them? Why aren't you creating some sort of committee to deal with this issue? If you've got it wrong, just admit the fact that you've got it wrong, and let's go and fix it. This idea about me giving you names, why should I have to give you names? Why can't my constituents just simply go to the college and get a place?
Final
as they
minute.
have done so historically?
Speak through the chair, please.
So therefore, I'm hopeful that the Commission, the report, it's moving in the right direction. It's encouraging us to do the right things. And I think what's important is it made us realize that we have to work more and more with industry, which we haven't done, I think, historically. And I think that's a very good point to take on board. I genuinely believe that we really need to sit down with our colleges, come up with solutions to resolve this issue so that no one in our society is denied an opportunity for education. And this idea about people having to give people names is wrong. I think what we need to do is resolve the problem rather than name picking. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. I now call on Dennis Robertson, who will be followed by Liam MacArthur.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. We sometimes in the North East have an ability to understate achievement, Presiding Officer. So with regard to Sir Ian Wood's interim report, maybe I should be saying the local loon's done nae bad. And that's quite a credit, really, for a Doric loon, I think. But, Presiding Officer, I actually wondered, going through this report, if Sir Ian Wood, in the recommendations, was actually looking at some of the work that was actually going on within the North East area. Certainly in my own constituency of Aberdeenshire West, I know that the Cabinet Secretary is very much aware of this, there's an academy there, West Hill Academy, that provide a module for our young S2 students to look at, and it's basically called Your Energy, Your Future. Now, at the end of the day, Presiding Officer, it's about providing information. Now, we would probably think within, aligning the North East to oil and gas, which is obviously the European hub of excellence for oil and gas, and certainly the subsea sector, that's what the young students would be focused on. But what happens actually within this module is it's taking the curriculum for excellence and taking it to its intended pathways. And that is to look at the infrastructure that builds around the whole energy sector. It's not just about trying to ensure that we've got the young men and women looking to opportunities within the sector in the North Sea. It's about the infrastructure that supports that. And I remember when I was actually at one of the workshops when the young students were actually presenting it to business people. They were actually looking at, how they would engage across the whole sector. And there was one young lad there said, well, I'm doing this because I was asked to, but I'm not interested in oil. I want to be a chef. Now, absolutely. And when it was put to him, do you think the sector requires chefs offshore? He hadn't actually considered that. Now, although we require chefs in our hospitality areas within the North East as well, we do require them offshore. And they will be supporting the men and women in their jobs offshore. And that made me start to think, how many of the young people within the North East and the school sectors, when they think oil and gas, only think about the drilling, the messy side of stuff? And maybe this is one of the reasons that some of our, maybe young women in particular, don't get that involved maybe in engineering sectors. And we certainly held evidence before when I was on the Equal Opportunities Committee, when we were looking at that particular thing, women in work. As maybe some of the reasons why some young women don't get involved is because they've got this idea of hard hats, oil and mess. Presiding Officer, the model I'm speaking about can be transferred throughout the whole of Scotland, because we need to align our education system
to our skills within the areas and within the regions of Scotland. The North East is perhaps an easy one, and certainly, employment is very low. But I remember when I went to the Heriot-Watt University and we were launching the EET report on underemployment, I was speaking to the careers people there. And one of the career advisors was saying to me that the young people at university are not engaging with the careers advice at university. But actually the students from overseas are. But our homegrown youngsters are not. And that made me to think, well, why haven't you resolved that? You know they're not engaging. Have you asked why? Have you tried to find out why? What are you doing to resolve the problem? And I take on board, I think it was comments that Jenny Mara mentioned earlier, that the careers advice in terms of where we're going needs to maybe happen at a much earlier stage. And that's why I'm so excited about the module that happens within the S2 system within Aberdeenshire and is rolling out in parts of Aberdeen City. Because I think that is giving young people an idea, a bigger idea, this broader aspect of the world of work. That they've probably grown up with stereotype ideas of what a policeman is, what a fire person is, what maybe someone, a doctor or someone in education or what. It doesn't matter what the subject is.
1 minute, Mr. Roberts.
Thank you very much, Presiding Officer. But what we need to do is get underneath that and look at the skills that they require. Recommendation 10 talks about the youngsters who are disengaged. I don't think they become disengaged, Presiding Officer. I just think they're not interested in what's being taught to them at that time. We need to try and find out what sets off their interest. And when we do that, we can then channel them down, and that's what CFE is about. Finding the right pathway for our youngsters in education through to college and university. And can I endorse the comments of John Mason? We should stop actually putting university education on a higher plateau to other sectors. It's not fair, it's not right, and it's not equal. Thank you.
Many, many thanks. Now call on Liam MacArthur to be followed by Kevin Stewart. Up to 6 minutes, please.
Thank you, Deputy Presiding Officer. Can I start too by welcoming Jenny Mara back to a portfolio that has education and skills at the heart of it, and also welcome the fact that we are considering the emerging thoughts from the Wood Commission. I think the establishment of the Commission was a positive move, and it's already been rewarded with some sensible, very cogent recommendations, ones I think that can be taken forward on a cross-party basis. So I add my thanks to those of others, to Sari and Annie's colleagues for the valuable work to date, and I look forward to what emerges from the next stage of their deliberations. On the idea of the summit mentioned by the Minister earlier, I think it may perhaps merit waiting until we can look at Sir Ian's recommendations in the round, and I say this partly because very often we're tempted, for the best of motives, to push through programmes and initiatives in the hope that the private sector will respond. Whereas what we need to ensure, of course, is that the pull from business is working very much in tandem with the push from the public and voluntary sectors. Nevertheless, I very much welcome and accept the invitation from the Minister and Sir Ian to engage on a cross-party basis in taking this work forward. In the time available, let me touch on a few of the points raised in the interim report. Not surprisingly, modern apprenticeships is front and central, subject to, I think, 4 separate recommendations, talking about the need for greater alignment with skills required to support economic growth, focus on developing higher level apprenticeships, a focus also on quality improvement, and indeed on increasing numbers, albeit not at the expense of quality. I think all of those are very sensible recommendations. They speak to some of the issues that have been raised already with us in the Education and Culture Committee, where I think the discussions around the need to broaden and expand the pool of Scottish-based companies involved in the apprenticeship programme has been raised. I think the proportion of companies involved north of the border compared to south of the border is slightly less. I know there are reasons for that. It's not a straightforward comparison, but it did seem to be a weakness that SDS themselves agreed required addressing. The Cabinet Secretary was in the committee this morning. Yeah, certainly.
Minister Angela Constance.
I appreciate the tone and tenor of Mr MacArthur's contribution, but I wonder if he would accept that when you actually look at the proportion of employers who recruit young people under the age of 25, that Scotland outperforms the rest of the UK. you know, by a few points, but I would nonetheless, you know, can unite in the point that we need to encourage more employers to recruit young people direct from education, because when you speak to those who do, they accept that young people make a very worthy contribution to the workplace.
That's a helpful contribution. I was going to go on to say that the Cabinet Secretary this morning was talking about evangelising about the programmes and support that's available, and I think in that spirit, hopefully, the announcement by the UK Government of a £2,000 national insurance rebate from next April provides just such an opportunity to capitalise on what might be done to improve that situation. Struck also in the interim report by the use of case studies and highlighting different approaches in different parts of the country. Conspicuous by its absence for me was the example of Sophie Turner, who was recently awarded a 4-year apprenticeship as a stonemason at St Magnus Cathedral, supported by Orkney Islands Council, the CITB and Historic Scotland. This is, I think, a phenomenal opportunity to work alongside Colin Watson, the current stonemason, in a unique and iconic building, the Light of the North. And I think just the sort of innovation and creativity we see in the apprenticeship programme needs to be supported. The St Magnus Cathedral was also the location 10 days ago for the Orkney College UHI graduation ceremony, and while we were denied a screening of the Cabinet Secretary's video, we were privileged to see an array of different talents paraded before us in terms of the range of skills that are now delivered locally within the islands. None more so than within the construction sector, although it does bear reflection that the construction sector have been pointing to problems in terms of procurement legislation that is denying them the opportunity to expand the range of apprenticeships that may be available. From the local Scottish Building Federation representative in Orkney, I received an email saying that Orkney College blockwork and carpentry departments should have been bursting at the seams over the past few years, with a massive intake of students all employed on the biggest capital investment in Orkney for generations in terms of the school's building programme. However, through that programme, I understand that only 2 apprentices were actually taken on, and neither of those will actually see out their apprenticeships in Orkney. So I think there is work to be done there in terms of procurement. Other colleagues have referred to the issue of STEM. I very much welcome the recommendations from Ms Sir Ian in his interim report. He's absolutely right that higher level skills and the knowledge of science, technology, engineering and maths will be increasingly important in the years ahead. Sir Ian's observations, I think, are particularly welcome in that regard, and I agree wholeheartedly that STEM should sit at the heart of the development of Scotland's young workforce. I don't think I've got time, I'm afraid, Dennis.
Members in his last minute.
So while I'm in favour, not in favour intuitively of ring fencing, I think if we're serious about promoting STEM within the apprenticeship programme, some form of protection within the budget and vigorous promotion within the overall programme will be needed. And I think I would also echo the comments from Ken McIntosh and Claire Adamson about the need to address the lack of women in STEM professions. Hopefully Sir Ian's report gives us an opportunity to give impetus to that. On college fundings, they're critical to the development of skills of our young people. I was pleased to see the firm recommendation about the need for greater partnership between our colleges and schools. Development of vocational skills pathways is fundamentally important, but as Sir Ian makes clear, it cannot be done on the cheap. He talks about the increase in the need for a demand for NC and HNC and also for HND. In other words, our colleges need to be adequately funded. We've argued against some of the proposed college cuts. These have been partially successful, but further cuts are going to place stress upon the college's ability to deliver. We do need to resource our colleges properly, not just so they can fulfil their role in terms of genuine lifelong learning, but so they can play a full part in developing Scotland's young workforce. Presiding Officer, I welcome today's debate.
You must close.
Congratulate Sir Ian on the work carried out today and look forward to taking forward these discussions. Thank you.
Many thanks. Now call on Kevin Stewart to be followed by Gavin Brown. Up to 6 minutes, please.
Thank you, Presiding Officer, and I welcome the interim report from Sir Ian Wood's Commission, and I am glad that we've got the opportunity to debate that report today, Presiding Officer. On Good Morning Scotland on the 5th of October, Jim Sweeney of Youth Link Scotland, when he was asked about the impact of Tory plans to take benefits away from under 25, said, "Young people are individuals, and each individual has a story to tell, and each individual needs some help and support critical to them in their situation, rather than blanket coverage or blanket bans." And it creates a very negative image of young people, and that's what really annoys people who work with young people on a day-to-day basis. We spend our lives working with young people. We're absolutely astounded with their resilience given what the world throws at them. We feel there should be a much more positive message about our young people. They are an asset to us, not a liability. And I agree wholeheartedly that young people are an asset to us. The Minister at the very beginning of this debate mentioned her time at school, and I'm going to relate a story from my time at school. I always remember a teacher, a maths teacher, saying about one individual pupil, let's call him John, that he was absolutely useless at maths and should spend his time, all of his time, in the technical department. And the guy was particularly good. He designed and made things of value. What that teacher forgot was that that guy used math skills to design those items and use maths to create the things that he did. And, you know, this is a difficulty, I think, that we still have, where many, many, many people don't see the strength and the opportunity in others. The Minister also stated at the start of the debate that she wanted to see opportunity gaps eradicated. I want to see opportunities seized upon and strengthened in every area, whether that be at school, whether that be at college, whether that be at university, and at home. I think that is extremely important too. Many colleagues have talked about bringing employers closer to the workplace. And I think that that is absolutely vital that we do so. And we have got good examples from across the country. But we need to make sure that best practice is carried out everywhere. In Sir Ian's report, we have got 11 pages of good practice. And I wonder how much of that good practice is actually being looked at in depth by other areas and whether others are following suit. Because all too often, we do not talk about the good things that are going on, and we do not ensure that those good things are exported right across the country. I think that what is required here is a dose of common sense in some regards. And people in this chamber have heard me time and time again talking about gumption. And I think that if gumption is brought into play here, it will make life much, much easier in achieving the goals that we want to see. In the last part of my contribution, I would like to concentrate on two things. And that is something that Claire Adamson talked about, and bringing women into science. And I think that, you know, engineering, technology, sometimes, as Dennis Robertson has said, hasn't got the right image. But one of the things which has encouraged me greatly in recent times is the amount of women that are being brought into life sciences. And I think that, you know, science is a broad, broad spectrum. Technology is a broad, broad spectrum. Engineering is a broad, broad spectrum. I think that we should be telling people much, much more about what opportunities there are. As Dennis said, sometimes we stereotype various careers. I don't have time, sorry. We stereotype various careers, and I think that we've got to go beyond that stereotyping and actually tell folk what opportunities there are. Finally, Presiding Officer, one of the things which I am a little bit disappointed in on the report, and I'm sure that the follow-up will have this featuring in it, and that is work for people with disabilities, and particularly folks with learning disabilities. Now, I know that the Minister herself has taken a great interest in the work of organisations such as Values into Action Scotland, and their Young Scotland's Got Talent programme, which has helped many, many people into work. I think that much more can be done on that front. I think the report says that we have got to show employers that they need to take an active part in all of this work and not just be passive passively looking on in some of these things. I think in terms of the learning disability aspect of this, we must show employers that they have got a lot to gain by employing people with special needs. Thank you very much, Presiding Officer.
And thank you. Now call on Gavin Brown to be followed by George Adam. Up to 6 minutes, please.
Thank you, Deputy Presiding Officer. Like other speakers today, I welcome this interim report. It has been led by a highly regarded industry figure with very credible members alongside him and a range of consultees, which is obvious from the back of the report. There's much to be commended in the report. But today I want to focus on one very specific aspect of the report, and an aspect that the Commission is quite explicitly going to look at in the second half of its work. It's an area where I think there is a genuine weak point in the system. It has been pointed out by others over a period of years, but it remains a weak point. It's a weak point across the United Kingdom, not just in Scotland, and it's a weak point, I think, across several governments, not specifically this one. And it's the issue of employer engagement, and in particular employer engagement with SMEs, the small and medium-sized enterprises who make up the backbone of the Scottish economy. Now, the Commission say at page 2 that they intend to explore how more employers could be encouraged to employ young people as they come out of education, and that, of course, is to be welcomed. But at page 20 they say this: the Commission recognises that smaller employers will struggle with some of this agenda, and we must maximise the extent to which various approaches are SME-friendly. Now, we've heard those words before countless times, but I think this Commission, particularly given who is on the Commission and who leads the Commission, has perhaps a unique opportunity to genuinely do something about the weakness in the system here. We are not good at engaging with SMEs, but the consequence of doing so, I think, could be terrific, not just for the young people and the SMEs themselves, but for the economy of Scotland as a whole in the longer term. Building relationships with employers is a significant hurdle, and it's one that takes time to develop, but I do think strongly that it's worth investing that time and doing so. To me, the entire argument was encapsulated during a workshop I attended in Dundee as part of the Finance Committee inquiry. And I spoke there to a lady who described herself as head of HR for the business that she ran. But she described herself also as a director of the business, the head of procurement for that business. She was in charge of cleaning the office for that business. She was sometimes a delivery driver for that business. And she did just about everything there was for that business to do, and said quite bluntly, while I would love to take on 1 or 2 more young people, I simply don't have the time to find and locate them. And she put it as bluntly as I think it can be put: if it is straightforward, Mr. Brown, to take on a young person, I will do it. If it is complex, I probably won't do it. And we've heard that from businesses up and down the country, particularly those smaller businesses who don't have a dedicated HR director, who do find it difficult to send somebody along to a particular meeting and to be proactive about it. Sure, happy to give way.
Angela Constance.
The Government takes Mr Brown's point, and that's one of the reasons when we set up the Youth Employment Scotland Fund was to recognise that the needs of small businesses in particular, that they wouldn't necessarily have HR expertise, but that is actually reflected in the Youth Employment Scotland Fund and how that's been utilised across local authority areas to enable people to scale up local wage incentive schemes. But part of that is to make it easier, particularly for small employers.
Gavin Brown.
I'm grateful for that intervention, Deputy Presiding Officer, and take her point on that particular initiative. But this has to be deeply embedded in every initiative we take forward to do, not just with youth employment, but with employment schemes more generally. It can't be something that we focus on once and turn our backs on. It's something that has to be at the very heart of the process, while the process is designed, but also as the process is being implemented so that companies and smaller businesses buy into it. One of the reasons the SME community isn't as engaged as we would all like it to be is the simple fact that they are extremely busy running their businesses, making a living, keeping their head above water. For these state agencies to engage with smaller businesses is hard. It's time-consuming. If there were easy answers, I suspect we would have found them by now and implemented them all by now. It is easier to set up a website, for example, than it is to pound the pavement and go into every shop on a particular street as a member of an agency, telling you what the agency can do and trying to see if they can sneak a couple of minutes with the owner or manager of that business. It may not pay short-term dividends, but I think in the medium to longer term it does. Deputy Presiding Officer, in the recent Skills Pulse survey run by the Scottish Chambers of Commerce and published on the SDS website, the reasons given by businesses for non-participation by employers are these. 36% say that they're not sure which programmes or schemes are relevant to their organisation. 26% say they're not aware of any employment or skills-related programmes. 16% say they don't know how to access government programme schemes. Deputy Presiding Officer, I didn't make the point today to get an instant response for the government. I think it is the responsibility of all political parties in this chamber, the government and for industry too. But I think the prize, if we get this right, the prize if this Commission focuses heavily on it, is a big one for young people and for businesses and for the economy of Scotland. Thank you.
Many, many thanks. Now call on George Adam to be followed by Margaret McCulloch.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. I welcome this interim report and the debate and the consensual tone of the debate, and I'm going to try and do my best to ensure that I continue that. Change the habits of a lifetime, some might say, but ensure that we can, because it means too much to us all. As Gavin Brown quite rightly stated, the prize is ensuring that we do create the future for our young people, and some of the things that have been mentioned in this report are extremely important. The interim report for the Commission for Developing Scotland's Young Workforce highlights in 21st century Scotland, both academic and vocational education are critically important, and we need to develop high quality vocational education leading to industry relevant qualifications alongside academic studies. Now, much of that's been actually something we've discussed during this debate today, is to ensure that we actually have a way where it can it's joined up for the young person to go through the process. And the report also acknowledges that a number of important changes are already underway, including the Curriculum for Excellence that's developing broader skills in schools, larger colleges, focusing on regional labour markets with a greater emphasis on employment outcomes, and the 25,000 employed in modern apprenticeships per year. These are all things that the report's already acknowledged, that things are moving forward with the Scottish Government, and it's ensuring that our young people gain the knowledge and a sustainable vocation and giving them the foundation for their own future to ensure that they can actually live the life that they want. The Minister, Angela Constance, mentioned many of the successes that we've had at the moment, but as everyone else keeps saying here, this isn't the end of the journey, this is the beginning. She is one of the only youth employment ministers in the whole of Europe. So, we've made such great progress in our time in the post. We have to ensure that we keep things moving forward as well. And this report helps along these lines as well. Kevin Stewart also mentioned the fact that, we don't mention good practice and good news an awful lot. And I think that's true. I think we have to be positive and say that there's a lot of good things out there, because it is far too easy to be quite, when we see the challenges that we face, to actually say that it's quite difficult out there. But I'd like to mention some of the aspects of the report which actually talks about some of the positive aspects that are happening. And it just so happens that the two I'm going to mention are from Paisley. But it's the Renfrewshire Chamber of Commerce. They're working with all the schools in the county area, making sure that the Chamber is working with the Education Department in a partnership agreement, possibly working with other businesses as well within their membership, possibly helping with Mr Brown's idea of SMEs, working with younger people, making sure they're getting this access. And this has been extremely successful locally, and it's been one of the things that's been mentioned in the interim report as good practice and something that we should look at maybe wider as well. And I take on board what Kevin Stewart says as well, that sometimes we have to make sure that we do talk about these things so that they do get used elsewhere. Like one of the other things that's happening locally in my area, which is mentioned in the report, is West College Scotland's work placement for learners with additional needs. Young people with additional support needs are supported by West College Scotland through work experience. The students are given maximum support to enable them to make choices and to participate in meaningful placements and challenging learning and teaching with strong focus on developing their life skills and work. Now, that's extremely important. One of the things that the Cabinet Secretary will be aware of is, yes, no problem.
Is there, Dugdale?
Thank you, Presiding Officer. I've got my own little Paisley statistic here. I wondered whether the member thinks it's good news that there are 150 fewer young people at Reed Care College and 837 fewer women at Reed Care College than there were 5 years ago.
George Adam.
I would say to the member that the most important thing is that we deal with the situation we have in hand and actually move things forward. And I would say West College Scotland are doing an extremely good job in their area to try and develop things. I wouldn't listen to anyone who was trying to kind of talk down the West College Scotland, because one of the things that the Cabinet Secretary actually saw was when he came along, there was actually a plumbing course that people were doing, learning the modern apprenticeship scheme. But not only, it was so much of the curriculum for excellence that it actually was so involved that not only did they teach all the young people to be plumbers, they actually got to the stage where when they had some of the extra material that was left over, they actually did some art projects with that as well. And you ended up with some, well, I know the Cabinet Secretary may be getting a delivery of one of the art projects as well, because it was what does Scotland mean to you? And he came along and saw it, and it just showed, different, making people actually think, not just learn the trade, but actually the whole idea of the curriculum for excellence, to be able to actually think everything through and see tick all, not just a box ticking exercise, but being able to actually show what they can offer and achieve. And for me, these are the exciting, dynamic things that are making a difference in our communities. The Commission itself recommends to build on the success of the Scottish Government's strengthening and reform of further education. And I think some of the things I've already mentioned has actually highlighted a lot of that. But what you have to say to yourself, Scotland's modern apprenticeship scheme has delivered 25,691 modern apprenticeships starts in 2012-13, and the Scottish Government's offered to deliver at least 25,000 modern apprenticeship starts per year in the life of this government. Now, these are good things. This is actually moving things forward, and I don't want to... obviously, the Cabinet Secretary mentioned at the Education Committee today about the years gone by where we had a lost generation, when the other governments were there, and he was very, very polite and gentle with it, but I don't want to go back to the dim, dark days of Thatcherism, where we actually had a situation where there was a generation lost. I would say in closing that I welcome this report, Presiding Officer, the interim report, and some of the recommendations on how we can actually move things forward. The Government has done so much just now. It's a case of us all working together, staying focused, and ensuring that we can make these outcomes happen for the young people in Scotland.
Excellent. Many, many thanks. Now calling Margaret McCulloch, to be followed by Christina McKelvey.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. In beginning my remarks today, I thought it would be helpful to consider the words of the Chair of the Commission, Sir Ian Wood, who said, "We all understand the value of Scotland's higher education system, but we now need to significantly enhance our vocational system, how we prepare our young people as they progress through to college, apprenticeships and employment." I want to talk today about how we develop vocational education, close gaps in employability provision and achieve parity with higher education. We have to challenge what the report describes as an ingrained and frankly ill-informed culture that somehow vocational education is an inferior option. In my opinion, we achieve that by mainstreaming the very best practice and developing vocational education and training which is relevant to both the needs of the economy and the needs of the young people. But first, I want to speak briefly about colleges and apprenticeships. The case for college regionalisation has been debated time and again in this chamber. We are told it would lead to greater emphasis on job outcomes and regional labour markets. Let me be clear, I'm not opposed to reform of the college sector in principle. I am, however, extremely concerned about this government's tendency to reduce college budgets at a time when the sector is changing so dramatically and when further education and training has never been more important. And in apprenticeships, we have a good model in Scotland, but some of the feedback to the Commission has indicated that more starts are required. I have said before, and I will say again, that we need to think carefully about how we expand the number of apprenticeships while preserving their quality. I therefore take some encouragement from the Commission's recommendations that MAs should be geared towards supporting growth and that we should be prepared to expand the number of MA starts accordingly if we have a buy-in from employers. In producing their interim report, the Commission has looked at examples of best practice from all across Scotland. I want to draw the Chamber's attention to 3 from my own area which we can learn from. Firstly, the Commission observed that in-school delivery of vocational education in North Lanarkshire as part of a mainstream comprehensive education has been recognised at both national and international level. In practice, this has meant partnerships with the college sector and adaptations to school facilities to create an environment for young people which more resembles a workplace but remains based in school. North Lanarkshire Council have provided a great example of how vocational education can be integrated into normal school week, and it is an example which other schools and local authorities can learn from. Secondly, I want to highlight the work of Calderglen High School in East Kilbride, South Lanarkshire. The Commission singled out Calderglen because of the inspection report it received in December, in which staff, pupils, the school community and its partners were widely praised. The quality and the range of partnerships the school forged in the community are said to provide inspirational learning experience for young people. That partnership with local employers like Santander, the Optical Factory and the Scottish Environmental Research Centre was just one of the reasons why Calderglen High School became the first school in Scotland to have its curriculum evaluated as excellent under the new Curriculum for Excellence standards. Thirdly, I want to draw the Chamber's attention to the work of the Prince's Trust and their Get Into programme, which is cited as an example of supporting young people at risk of disengaging from education. On Friday, I had the pleasure of presenting graduates of the Get Into Logistics programme with their certificates at the Crowland Hotel in East Kilbride. 7 young men and 1 young woman had just successfully gone through a short vocational course focused on developing their skills for logistics with the involvement of a leading industrial partner. All of them were offered warehouse jobs at the DHL Sainsbury's site in East Kilbride as a result. But the scheme isn't just for logistics. There are over 30 programmes across a whole range of sectors, including retail, construction and hospitality. The Get Into programme is successful because it works with industry to come up with sector-specific training, giving young people work experience which is relevant and employers a better skilled and more job-ready pool of potential applicants. What those examples demonstrate is that real partnerships with employers, colleges and training providers can make vocational training more relevant, more engaging and ultimately it can lead to improved outcomes for young people. Rolling out that kind of best practice could not only close some of the gaps in provision identified by people who responded to the Commission, particularly the mismatch of supply and demand, but those better outcomes could also help us elevate the status of vocational education. The final point I would make is that opportunities to work and to train will always be more plentiful in an economy which is growing. Let's make the most of this opportunity to improve employability in Scotland. But remember, the real prize is not attainment for all. It's an economy that works for all. And that kind of economy has to be based on full employment. Thank you.
Thank you. Now call on Christina McKelvey to be followed by Richard Baker. Up to 6 minutes, please.
Thank you very much, Deputy Presiding Officer. Scotland's young workforce has the future of the country in its hands. Maybe a bit of a cliche, but being the mother of a young man who's benefited from an apprenticeship, I can see that his future is rosy. They have the potential to be major economic contributors in developing a fairer, more prosperous and more caring society, working for the common weal, if you will. The school, college and university leavers of today have the opportunity to move away from the restrictions brought about by a Westminster government that has little understanding of the challenges they face and, it seems, even less commitment to trying to do anything to help our young people tackle and equip themselves to meet those challenges. We know, Presiding Officer, that university isn't necessarily the best path for everyone. Employers want young people who understand the importance of basic skills like team working, respect for your colleagues, being able to communicate effectively, understanding the digital economy and all of the essential work skills that go with the responsibility of just having a job in the first place. These skills for the job will then be absorbed because the individual is well placed to have the commitment to deliver for his or her employer because that employer has invested in them. Young people themselves recognise this, and organisations like Young Scots and tools like My World of Work and organisations like Skills Development Scotland are striving to help match up employment and apprenticeship opportunities with those basic skills to work. That we now have 25,000 plus apprenticeship opportunities every year for the duration of this Parliament and the increased certainty of a job on completion has to be recognised as a major step forward. The Wood Report consultation examined how best we now need to develop our skills base. As a government, the government we know, we can provide the best possible opportunities to significantly enhance vocational education and pathways for young people in schools through partnerships with third-level institutions. Presiding Officer, in my previous employment, I was a social work, learning and development officer, and I took people from no qualifications all the way through to the target of having a social work degree, and to see people blossom in that way is absolutely amazing. So I place a lot of value in vocational education. So Ian Wood sees clearly how we need to shed the notion that if you haven't gone to university, you're somehow less valuable. We know that's not true. But it's a culture that runs through many countries and is very far from being a Scottish-only issue. We still fail to recognise that different people with different kinds of skills require different paths to move forward. There aren't better paths or worse paths, they're just different. Across the UK as a whole, between May and July this year, the unemployment rate for those aged 16 to 24 was running at 21.7%. 960,000 young people were unemployed, up 9,000 on the previous quarter. Worse still, 1.7 million of 18 to 24-year-olds were economically inactive, NEETs, as they have become disparagingly known, not in employment, education or training. That was an increase of 58,000 in the previous quarter and 65,000 higher in the same period last year. So the overall employment rate for the UK for 18 to 24-year-olds is 18.9%, but for 16 to 17-year-olds, the rate is 38%. Scottish unemployment, as we know, has fallen for several months in a row, and as we know, youth unemployment also remains too high. We've recognised that here today, though it has decreased by 2.7% over the last year and currently stands at around 21.6%. The Scottish Government is making an impact, and employment here is higher than in any of the 4 UK nations, while unemployment is lower than in any of the 4. 57.2% of our young people are employed, against 49.8% in the UK as a whole. If that's the big vision, what about the local one? The trouble with UK-wide statistics, including those that I've just given, produced by the House of Commons Library, is that they never tell the whole story. They give no indication of what life is like if you're 17, unemployed and can't see a future for yourself. In South Lanarkshire, Presiding Officer, there's a range of support and guidance options backed by the Scottish Government and the EU. The Youth Employment Scotland Fund, the South Lanarkshire Job Funds, which is remitted to match employers to young employed and people. We've heard a lot today about how important that is. In June, we saw £800,000 out of the £90 million Scottish Government investment package going to South Lanarkshire Council to support 250 jobs for our young people. Unemployment among young people runs at 10%, a lot lower than the UK average, but still too high. I see the challenges these young people face every day, and I've had job fairs across my constituency to remedy and tackle some of those challenges. These young people, Presiding Officer, are not lazy, uncaring or without ambition, far from it. Though David Cameron might want to dress them up in high-visibility jackets and label them community payback and then denies them job seekers allowance, these young people have the determination. Certainly, there's not a school or a training organisation, I think, that any of us have went into where we've not seen that determination and that commitment from those young people. Marrying the needs of employers to available workforce is, as Sir Ian Wood recognises, a two-way process. Now that, through his consultation, we have a clearer picture of the positive factors such as overall nature and value of the provision of a young workforce, ways of working with the roles and role modelling with particular stakeholders, and specific forms of provision that work best. This isn't a one-size-fits-all. We can never have that. But this government is doing what it can to bridge these gaps. In Lanarkshire, we've already suffered the ravages of blind dismantling of once vibrant industries. Now we need to work even harder to bring jobs and investment and to ensure that we have the right structures in place for young people to get the training and the advice they need to get any work. We are moving in the right direction. Now we need to accelerate that action and invest further in young people. And I really look forward to Sir Ian Wood's final report.
Thanks. Now call on Richard Baker, after which we'll move to closing speeches.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. This is a welcome debate on an important report because in its focus on dealing with the long-term challenges in aspects of youth employment, it also highlights there are no quick fixes in achieving the kind of skilled economy we aspire to create in this country, nor in creating the levels of growth in our economy we want to see, and in doing that, offering more employment opportunities to our young people as well. And throughout this debate, members have rightly highlighted recommendations of the Commission, which, if implemented, will deliver an education system with better outcomes for very many of our young people. Although I also think it is interesting and healthy that a number of members have identified areas where the Commission might do more work and develop its thinking, and have challenged the Commission as well. And it's good there's been the opportunity for Parliament to provide food for thought for the Commission through this debate, and why the fact it has published an interim report is a good thing. I'm particularly interested in what the Commission has to say about the relationship between the business community and our education system. So, as it says, that businesses are no longer simply consumers of education, and a number of members have talked about this. And we know businesses often complain that the current system doesn't deliver people with the skills they say they need. So how much better than simply to complain about it for businesses to engage more meaningfully with our schools, our colleges and universities? And here I'm sure the Commission will have benefited considerably from the chairmanship of Sir Ian Wood and his knowledge of these matters developed during his phenomenal career in the energy industry. And as a member for the North East, I am of course very much aware of the opportunities for employment there are for young people, specifically in the energy industry and in oil and gas in particular. A recent PricewaterhouseCoopers report stated that the industry needs to recruit and train over 120,000 people in the next 10 to 15 years to fully capitalise on existing and future opportunities in the industry. And what is for sure is that local businesses tell us they are crying out for more skilled workers right now. In the past few years, it's clear that there have already been positive developments in the relationships between businesses and the academic institutions of the North East. The Commission recommends businesses engage with education in a way they haven't done before. And it strikes me that certainly in the energy industry, they have a receptive audience on this point. And Dennis Robertson pointed to examples in his constituency of such work in this area, and that's of course going on in a number of areas throughout the North East. So there can be no better time for the Scottish Government to help foster these links through its work. The success of Aberdeen College's oil and gas training arm, ASET, shows the potential which is there. It seems clear to me that there is no shortage of demand within industry for the young people who've attained these skills through this training, nor a shortage of demand from young people themselves to take up these places. So not to offer more opportunities like this at ASET means young people missing out on opportunities for work and continuing acute challenges for our businesses to recruit the skilled workers that they need. So we must all hope this is not a situation which pertains for the future. And when I refer to opportunities in this context, of course I'm talking about opportunities for young people in my region in the North East, but also I believe opportunities for young people in other parts of Scotland as well, where youth employment problems are even greater. And I think we have to think laterally in some of those areas about how we get more people and more young people in other parts of the country to benefit from these opportunities as well. That is why it's essential ministers back the ambitions of this report by investing in further education, as our motion highlights, and I'm pleased the amendment's been accepted. It's very welcome that the Scottish Government is in the energy activities of the North East institutions, investing in those through its Energy Academy. That is very welcome investment, but the problem is, as other members have said, ministers are giving in one hand in that area, but taking away in the other by cutting millions of pounds in the budgets of our local colleges in the North East. And we say that approach will have to change if the ambitions correctly laid out in this report are to be achieved. So I hope ministers will show their welcome intentions to support the proposals put forward by the Commission will be backed by action to ensure that in future our colleges have the support they need to give our young people the life chances they deserve. A number of members also talked about the need to share best practice and also referred to the references in the report on support for our young people at risk of disengaging from education. And I hope that the Commission in this area will look to examples in the North East, where there certainly are examples of best practice, and I'd urge them to look at the success of some of the most innovative schemes in this area. For example, the work of Station House Media Unit in Aberdeen, which has achieved great success in bringing young people out from areas where they wouldn't consider having the opportunity to go into employment or being willing to do so, and transforming their opportunities and indeed their whole approach to this area as well. So I look forward to debating the Commission's final report, which I'm sure will bring forward more positive recommendations to promote employment opportunities opportunities for our young people. There's no doubt that in the North East, those opportunities are there, and that with the right support from government, many more of our young people will be able to take up these chances, which will, of course, benefit them as individuals, but will be of huge benefit to the wider Scottish economy as well.
Many thanks. And we now move to closing speeches, and I call on Mary Scanlon up to 6 minutes, please.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. I think this has been an excellent debate with many interesting contributions from across the Chamber based on an excellent interim report from Sir Ian Wood. And there's absolutely no doubt of the commitment on all sides of the Chamber to more emphasis on vocational training in future. As our amendment states, what cannot be ignored is the cuts to further education budgets, as it is in further education that much of the success of this policy will be achieved. So not only has there been a fall in the teaching budget for colleges of £69 million in the 2 years from 2010 to 12, but there's also been a fall of over 140,000 part-time students between 2007-12. Dennis.
Dennis Robertson.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. I'm grateful to the member for giving a brief intervention. Would the member accept that, I know you're saying that further education is the pathway, but is it not education at the school is the pathway that the young person will maybe decide where their future lies, whether it be college or university or maybe some other path indeed?
Mary Scanlon.
That was clear in the report, and that was why I said it is in further education that much of the success of this policy will be achieved. But I thank the member for his intervention. The National Union of Students make the point that the Wood reforms will fall on colleges to implement, and they're more than capable to do so. However, with 2 years of change, regionalisation and mergers, alongside reduced budgets and constantly being asked to do the same with less, there's no doubt that these reforms will be challenging. The report also states, and I quote, "There could be some additional college costs for a good news reason, with the vocational pathway beginning in 4th year at school and more national certificate, higher national certificate and HND qualifications. And of course, these qualifications need not be the end of studying, as they can be used to bypass first year at university with a straight articulation into 2nd year." I would also say the point Kezia Dugdale made, this is, I think it's page 13, recommendation 5, it does also mention the potential to reduce existing costs in the senior phase at school. But the better alignment of college courses with labour market demands, as well as building work experience into courses and support for students seeking employment, are all very welcome elements of the Wood report that, if implemented in full, and I hope they will be, would transform the lives of many young people and hugely reduce youth unemployment. Of course, this can be achieved locally, but it is disappointing that the Wood report points out, and again I quote, "To date, the growth has been across the labour market at a range of job levels, with only limited specific focus on the key sectors identified within the government economic strategy." So while we rightly expect colleges and schools to identify labour demand, we should also rightly expect the government to ensure that their goals and strategy are used to more actively target modern apprenticeships, as job prospects will understandably be greater in areas of future economic growth. Recommendation 12 highlights that most employers do not recruit directly from the world of education. And I hope the Chamber will forgive me, but it's reminded me when I lectured at Perth College, there were 2 students. One came to college, successfully completed a national certificate, HNC and HND in accounting, in order to get a job in the local bank. His friend left school at the same time under Mrs Thatcher's Youth Opportunity Scheme. He was employed by the bank for 2 years and then given a full-time contract. These 2 friends from school pursued different pathways, but when the college student left with his HND to get a job in the bank, You're probably ahead of me now. His line manager turned out to be his friend who did the YOP scheme at school, who had also managed to pass some of his banking exams. So going straight from school into work certainly helped in this case, and I think, as others have said, has helped in many other cases. But I would also like to highlight the partnership between Highland Council and Inverness College, which generally sees more people applying than there are places available. And from age 14 onwards, they can apply to go to college on Fridays. To find out more about courses and the study for SVQ Level 4 in many disciplines such as childcare, construction, car mechanic, fabrication and welding, professional cookery, hairdressing and uniformed and emergency services. I was also pleased to hear that these courses run from August to May, and they're generally called Skills for Work courses. But there is also a course called the Get Ahead programme for Christmas leavers who go to college for 2 days a week from September to December, doing taster courses to help decide them what to do. So although there's a lot of best practice at the back of the Wood report, I think there's also a lot of very good practice that isn't mentioned. I would also add that the college has excellent links with industry, and in many cases a local garage will phone up and say if you've got any decent mechanics coming through, and they help to place them.
You're out of time.
But the college environment is essential for students working in their kitchen whites alongside people who have experience in hospitality industry. And just finally, I hope Sir Ian's Wood's report will not be ignored. It's 12 years since our amendment was overwhelmingly supported in the old Parliament, and I hope we'll move forward today.
Thank you very much. Now call on Kezia Dugdale, up to 7 minutes, please.
Thank you very much, Presiding Officer. And can I, like others, thank Ian Wood for his very positive report, which has been welcomed widely and broadly across the Chamber. I very much appreciated the opportunity to contribute to that report, and myself and Joanne Lamont sat down with Ian Wood and his team for a good hour. Poor guy. And I was particularly pleased to see so much of what myself and Joanne Lamont had to say replicated in the report. And although it's not in the motion, there are significant sections in the report around the Modern Apprenticeship Programme, and George Adams and Margaret McCulloch referenced those. And it was really good to see much of what Labour Party has been articulating on the Modern Apprenticeships agenda over the past 18 months replicated in that. We kept saying you have to do more than just obsess with the figure of 25,000 modern apprenticeships. You're obsessed with the numbers. You're not so concerned as to what those numbers look like and where they come from. You're willing to encourage people to take up modern apprenticeships who are already in work, and you have a high proportion of level 2 modern apprenticeships which are quite short in the length of time that they take to study. So I was particularly... sorry, Ms Adamson, can I make a wee bit more progress and I'll let you in a wee bit? I was particularly amused by a paragraph from page 13. I know the Cabinet Secretary, Mike Russell, was keen for line-by-line references, and let me read the paragraph out. Now that it has been established that a higher number of employed apprenticeships can be sustained, modern apprenticeships in Scotland are at an important stage in their development. He says, alignment with the opportunities of economic growth, the creation of progression routes, quality improvement and increasing the number of employers offering modern apprenticeships are all key elements to their further development. That suggests to me that they were completely irrelevant up until now, and it was only the 25,000 figure that they were interested in delivering. The report goes on to make 3 recommendations around modern apprenticeships, and let me go through each in turn. The first one was to match modern apprenticeships more with the skills needs of the economy, and the report specifically says only a limited focus on the key sectors identified within the government's economic strategy are currently recognised, and that the modern apprenticeship programme should now more actively target economic growth. The second of those recommendations on modern apprenticeships was to focus on level 3 courses and above, and in the report it states, in the future, there should be more focus on modern apprenticeships at level 3 and above, with more higher level frameworks being encouraged in line with the move towards higher skills across the economy. And I said to Angela Constantine many times that 11,000 of the 25,000 modern apprenticeships she was delivering were level 2 courses. So I'm pleased to see a recognition now from the Scottish Government that you need more level 3s. The final of the recommendations on modern apprenticeships was around the status of modern apprenticeships, of course.
Angela Constantine.
Of course, takes very seriously the current recommendations made by the Wood Commission for a whole host of reasons, but I wonder if Ms Dugdale would acknowledge the importance of the apprenticeship programme in the employed status and that it's employer-led. And what we now need to do is to work out how we retain that employer-led element, but also meet the growing needs of the growing economy. And can we just be clear, I hope Ms Dugdale is not suggesting that we remove support to all 16 to 24-year-olds, because every 16 to 24-year-old in the current framework gets a support and a contribution from the government.
Kezia Dugdale.
That's a far cry from what I'm saying, Presiding Officer. And if you look at the third recommendation around modern apprenticeships, it does tell the Minister that she needs to look at valuing the status of modern apprenticeships differently. And that's merely the point I'm making. 11,000 of these modern apprenticeships take 6 months to complete. I think if you stop somebody in the street and ask them what they think a modern apprenticeship is, they view it as a 3 or 4 year commitment to a course. And that's something which the Wood report recognises. Back to the issue of economic growth, Presiding Officer, I was pleased to see so many comment on the need to address STEM subjects. Angela Constance said she was particularly interested in that, and Claire Adamson mentioned it a great deal in her speech. And I would say to the government that their record on this is not particularly good. In 2008-09, there were 43,000 FE awards in STEM subjects. Last year, that was 30,000, so a fall of 13,000 FE awards in STEM subjects. What's even more interesting is when you look at the gender breakdown of those particular courses. 84% of engineering modern apprenticeship frameworks were undertaken by men. So that is a huge mountain to climb if we're going to achieve a greater parity there. Compare that with something like health and social care modern apprenticeships, where only 2.6% of those were undertaken by men. Huge disparity in the figures that clearly needs addressed. And I'm pleased to see in the Wood report the fact that there is going to be a ring fence around STEM subject modern apprenticeships. And I wondered if the government might consider going further. I'm sorry, Mr Robertson, I need to continue on this point. I wonder if the government would consider a gender quota when it comes to its STEM framework and the ring fencing around the places there. If they're going to commit to, say, 500 modern apprenticeships in the STEM framework, could 250 of those be women? Would she be so bold as to say, we're going to take on the gender segregation in STEM subjects and tackle that head on with a serious quota? As a positive suggestion from these benches. Moving on, Presiding Officer, Liz Smith pointed out the disparity in the report around what it's going to cost to make these changes, and I felt she was quite unfairly attacked by the Cabinet Secretary at the time, because both the Labour Party and the Tories have pointed in their amendments to the resource implications of this, and there are 3 sections of the report that significantly point to additional expenditure. One is around having senior staff in schools who will concentrate on the vocational education role. It also mentions additional facilities, providing vocational education in schools that don't currently have those facilities, and that there will also be costs in the transition phase. And I guess it may just be a difference, Presiding Officer, in how you define the word significant, but I do think that they are legitimate questions that the government needs to address. And finally, Presiding Officer, on the issue of statistics, I'm afraid that my jaw nearly dropped when I heard Angela Constance attack my colleague Jenny Mara for using the statistics in her speech, because these are the statistics that she used regularly when unemployment was falling in this chamber, time and time again. And now that it's rising, they're unreliable, she says. Well, can I encourage her strongly? Can I encourage her strongly to... Can I encourage her strongly to have a word with our colleague John Swinney, who used exactly the same quarterly statistics to mark a record fall in unemployment? So I'm afraid there's a number of different ways that she can cut the statistics, but I would say to her very clearly, if the stats are good enough for John Swinney, they're certainly good enough for Jenny Mara. I'm afraid I'm in my last 20 seconds, Ms Adamson. I'm sorry that I didn't get you in today because you were kind enough to let me into your speech. In closing, Presiding Officer, let me finish where I started. This is an excellent report full of good recommendations. We will continue to support its contents. We've put forward some positive suggestions today. I hope the government are listening, and these benches look forward to debating these issues again. Thank you very much.
Many thanks. Now call on Cabinet Secretary Mike Russell to wind up. 9 minutes, please.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. And I think I can agree with the view that this has been a very productive and positive, in the main, debate, which teaches us many things. I think I start by welcoming Jenny Mara back to the front bench on education and training matters, and to say that I do agree entirely with her opening words, that most young people, indeed all young people, want to work. And I think we should have that at the heart of our considerations. We also should agree that young people have skills and can develop those skills further. We should look to making sure that they are developed in every young person. And I will agree with the closing words from Kezia Dugdale. This is an excellent report. We can agree the vast majority of issues within it. I'm absolutely certain also to agree with another point that Labour made this afternoon, that right across the chamber, and I think it was a point that Richard Baker made, right across the chamber, I'm certain that everything that we have said this afternoon will be noted by the Commission, will be considered by the Commission, and will be influential in how the Commission takes forward the next stage of its work. But if we are listening to Ian Wood, then we should do so accurately. And I want to start on the issue of funding. Not all funding is new funding. At the very start of his report, on page 2 in the foreword, at the start of the 4th paragraph, he says, "We believe our proposals are ambitious and challenging, but based on evolving good practice, and thus can be implemented without significant additional funding and phased in over a fairly short period of time." And later on page 13, as elsewhere, he goes into some of the detail. And I think the responsible position of this is exactly as expressed in Jerry Mara's amendment, which I'm happy to support, which says, and will insert into the motion that I support, that the words "notes the resource implications for colleges of the report's recommendations." I do note that. We all note that. We'll consider that very carefully as we go forward. So I don't think there is any great difference on that matter, despite how some Labour members have had to create that difference. And indeed, given the situation of colleges, one should note that the Vice-Chair of the Commission was Linda Mackay, the principal of Forth Valley College at the time when she was appointed. And colleges are absolutely up for this, and I know that with my very close work for colleges, and I note from the people who gave evidence, not only Kezia Dugdale and Johann Lamont, but actually over 20 individuals with college links. In other words, college staff or college chairs gave evidence, as did Colleges Scotland, as did the regional leads. So this report is fully informed by the real experience of colleges. And therefore, when the report talks about how this should go forward based upon the reforms of the college sector, and I quote, "based upon the move to larger regional colleges with more focus on regional labour markets and a greater emphasis on employment outcomes," in those circumstances we should listen to that and recognise it is the college reform process that has made the difference. And I quote again, page 10, "The regionalisation of Scotland's colleges provides a significant opportunity for the sector to continue to enhance the perception of college education." So this is informed by the reality of the changes that have taken place in college and will be built on in that way. Now, I want to address one or two of the points that have been made in the debate, but before I do so, let me come to the Tory amendment. I have to say that in her final words, Liz Smith said that she was committed to the Wood principles. Having seen the amendment, I have to think that the Tories are more committed to the Gove principles, because the reality in this amendment says that the objectives can only be achieved in full if there is greater diversity in schools and a reversal of the recent damaging cuts to the college budget. What, all of them? Are we to move back to 43 colleges? Are we to undo all the reform process? Because this report talks about the importance of the reform process. And I do think when one looks at the press release that was issued by the Tories last night, then to lean so heavily on abolishing, and it does say it, abolishing the comprehensive system is in its essence it's simply trying to use this report for ideological purposes. Give way.
I thank the Cabinet Secretary for taking an intervention. One of the clear messages from Sir Ian Wood is the example and the successes indeed of some of the systems abroad. And he points to Germany, to Denmark and various other ones. In these countries, Cabinet Secretary, they have a dual system of schooling that is very different from ours. Perhaps that's one of the reasons why we're interested in what his recommendations have to say.
Cabinet Secretary. I'm sorry, I just can't allow that to pass unchallenged. And I made the point earlier on. In the press release that was issued last night in Liz Smith's name, it says, "We need to make radical changes to the structure of education so that we can provide a much more diverse range." That is one of the reasons that she gives for her amendment. But the report says, page 5, "Our proposals don't require time-consuming, expensive restructuring of the education system." So it is either one or the other. It is either the Tories believe that this is a Trojan horse for abandoning the comprehensive system, or they accept the report. Now, Presiding Officer, I want to make a couple of remarks about the debate. I really don't want to fall out with my old friend Mr Mallock. He and I go a long way back, and I was very concerned at his reaction to what I said. So let me couch it in other terms. If he believes that he has, within the area he represents, significant waiting lists, despite the work that was done last year to prove that those did not exist, I invite him to come and talk. Well, I'm sorry people laugh at the Scottish Funding Council and the work that was done. I think that does no credit to the member who thought that that was a joke. But if he believes that's the case, I'm making a genuine commitment to him, if he thinks that I am paying no attention to this, and unfortunately that was what he said, come and I will make an appointment for him to talk to my officials, and if he wants to give that information, and they will also tell him what they think the situation is. So we can have a dialogue, because I don't want to fall out with Mr Malik on these matters. He's nodding vigorously. I hope he will take me up on that offer. Now, there were a number of very important contributions to the debate about individuals, and I want to conclude on the issue of individuals. Liam MacArthur, no, I really want to start to mention a couple of individuals. Liam MacArthur mentioned his constituent, Sophie Turner, who has got an apprenticeship in being a stonemason at St Magnus Cathedral. He unfortunately said that at the graduation of St Magnus Cathedral, the message of goodwill that I sent to colleges was not played. I'm happy to personally go to St Magnus and deliver it in the cathedral. But across, and it's an offer I'm sure he will take me up on, but across every constituency there are the Sophie Turners, individuals who are being given unique opportunities to take part in apprentices which give them life-changing experiences and lead to new careers. For example, now I must make progress, must make progress. It's a very short time I have to conclude on this. Owen Walker, another constituent of Mr MacArthur's, has just won the Loganair Scholarship, the Baird of Bute. You knew I would want to mention my own constituency, the Baird of Bute Loganair Scholarship in flying. A young man at school still, who is going out on a voyage of adventure to become a pilot, and it is a private company that has given him that first opportunity. So we should remember, and Richard Baker made the point, we should remember the key influence of private companies in this issue. But we should also remember the constraints under which we work. Because Gavin Brown's speech was very heavy, and I agree with him entirely, on what happens next with the Commission. The next stages, what will happen in terms of what could be done to encourage businesses to do more. I absolutely agree it should be simple and straightforward. I was speaking to members of the Dumfries Chamber of Commerce last night, and they made exactly the same point. But of course, employment law is reserved. Personal employment activity is reserved. So if you want to establish a new, simple and clearer system, then you have to have those things in this Parliament. In other words, you have to have independence.
The Cabinet Secretary is in his last minute.
On this matter.
Cabinet Secretary is in his last minute.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. I'm sure Mr. will want to raise it with me afterwards. This has been a positive debate because we all are positive about the future of young people in Scotland. Ian Wood and his team have done an exceptional job, but they've done it based on what exists. They've recognised the importance of curriculum for excellence. They've recognised the importance of college reform. They've recognised the work that my colleague has done on modern apprenticeships with others. They have recognised all those things, and they've said, now let's do better. That's a challenge to all of us. We should accept that challenge. We should do better. This gives us a chance to get on with it. Let's do it together.
That concludes the debate on the Commission for Developing Scotland's Young Workforce Interim Report. We now move on to the next item of business, which is consideration of motion number 7847 in the name of Kenny McCaskill on the Anti-Social Behaviour, Crime and Policing Bill UK legislation. And I call on Kenny McCaskill to move the motion.
Formally moved.
The question on this motion will be put at decision time. There are 4 questions to be put as a result of today's business. The first question is that amendment number 7939.1 in the name of Jenny Mara, which seeks to amend motion number 7939 in the name of Angela Constant on the Commission for Developing Scotland's Young Workforce Interim Report be agreed to. Are we all agreed? Yes. The amendment is agreed to. The next question is that amendment number 7939.2 in the name of Liz Smith, which seeks to amend motion number 7939 in the name of Angela Constance on the Commission for Developing Scotland's Young Workforce Interim Report be agreed to. Are we all agreed? No. The Parliament is not agreed. We move to a vote. Members should cast their votes now. The result of the vote on amendment number 7939.2 in the name of Liz Smith is as follows. Yes, 9, no, 78, There were 2 abstentions. The amendment is therefore not agreed to. The next question is that amendment number 7939, in the name of Angela Constance, as amended, on the Commission for Developing Scotland's Young Workforce interim report be agreed to. Are we all agreed? Yes. The motion is therefore agreed to. The next question is that motion number 7847, in the name of Kenny McCaskill, on the Antisocial Behaviour, Crime and Policing Bill UK legislation be agreed to. Are we all agreed? Yes. The motion is therefore agreed to. That concludes decision time. We move to members' business. Members who are leaving the chamber should do so quickly and quietly.
One job.